And also we said that when it comes to a manager, he manages an organization. So we talk about what is an organization, and also we said that organizations, so they are not isolated in society, so they always impact and impacted by other factors in the environment. So we have talked about the organizational environment where we have given focus towards the external environment rather than the internal environment, because we know that when it comes to the internal environment, so it's in your hands, so you can control it. But when it comes to the external environment, so it is out of your organization and it is out of your control. So it, out of innocence, it's a little difficult to control, and that is the place where you get the opportunities and threats. So today we will be talking about the evolution of management theory. So that means how the management came so far and where it is now, and what are the theories that we have learned. So the management philosophies and organizational forms, so that has been changed over time to meet the new needs. When it comes to the people, the community, as well as when it comes to the customers. So their requirements are changing. We are in a kind of a dynamic environment. So when they are changing, so you have to change theories in order to meet these needs. So the workplace today is really different from what it was 50 years ago. So just like that, it will be definitely it will be different from what it was even 10 years ago. So I mean 10 years from today. So this is what you have to understand, right? So when it comes to the ideas and practices that they have to change. So whatever the theories that you have learned, but still there are some ideas and practices from past are still highly relevant and applicable to the management even today. Right. So there are many students, right? So if you just think about most of the students that they wonder why we are studying history, why history matters to the manager. But when it comes to the historical perspective, right, so it gives you a kind of a broader way of thinking what happened in past and what went wrong and what are the things that we can learn. So this is why I said when it comes to the management theories, some of the theories that we have even learned 2 decades ago. So now still there are certain incidents, say certain moments that we use those theories even today, right? So therefore, you have to understand all these stuff. So if you just think about the employee stock ownership, right? So when it comes to this, it can appear account standards, තියෙන එක accounting මොනවාද transaction record කරන එක මේවා 1900 ගොඩාක් කලින් පටන් ගත්ත දේවල්, right? So if you just think about the Procter and Gamble, that they are the people who introduced the profit sharing plan. So that was in 1887, right? So when it comes to William Cooper, he's the person who have introduced it. And also Walmart is the person, I mean, Walmart is the organization who introduced the financial recording. So if you just think about that, they have included its salaries to all employees and all this stuff in 1960. So now it's happening in each and every organization. So the things that we have started even 2 decades ago, now so some of them have improved and some of those concepts still be using today's organization. So when we're talking about the management, so the first theory that we are going to describe is the scientific management theory. Right? So when we're talking about the management, so we talk about a number of perspectives, right? So we talk about the classical perspective, we talk about the humanistic perspective, and also we talk about the management science perspective. So if you just think about the classical perspective, Mama, so that is the early study of the management, right? So if you just think about today's scenario, what is what now we call as a classical perspectives, right? So that was the earliest one, right? So when you're talking about the classical perspectives on management, so that was there in 19th century, I would say 19th as well as early 20th century. So this was there. So when we're talking about the problems, so what are the problems that those organizations had that time? So the most of them were like the problems that is there with the tooling the plants, organizational managerial structure, and the way that they're gonna train employees, right? So they are scheduling a complex how to schedule the manufacturing operations. So these are the problems that they had, because when they were talking about the labor, so that as I said you before, so at that time there was a huge demand for the products and services, because now the population was increasing at that time. So therefore, there is a huge demand for the products and services. So in order to do that, the people, I mean the employers that they had to look for the ways that they can increase the production. So when they were trying to increase the production, employees, that they all were frustrated, that they always dissatisfied. So that resulted strikes. Right. So therefore, at that time, so the people, I mean the employers, that they have understood the requirement of a specific person who is known as the economic man or the salaried manager කියන position එක ඕනි කියලා අඳුරගත්තේ ඒ වෙලාවේදී. ඒ කියන්නේ ගොඩාක් conflicts එනවා employees ලා අතර ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන්න ඕනේ. So they have realized the importance of a different person who is not an owner. එයා ඕනකින් වෙනස් වෙන අපිට වැඩ කරන්න ඕන කෙනෙක් salary ගෙවන මිනිස්සෙක් ඉන්න ඕන කියන එක they have realized. So we call that the identification of the new subspecies of economic man, so which is known as the manager who work for the salary. So he was born at that time, right? So from 18th to the 19th century, so the number of professional managers in United States itself grew more than 100,000, right? So then if you just think about the total number of managers that we today see in organization, it's more than 100 million, I would say that, right? If you just think about the frontline managers too. So the professional managers, the role of the professional managers came into the picture. So they started to develop some of the solution for the organization. So we started to plan, organize, coordinate, controlling, and to do all these things. So when we're talking about the classical perspectives of organization, Lama, so the first thing that we are going to talk about is the scientific management theory. So when it comes to the classical perspective, so there are three things that we're going to discuss under the classical perspective. So the first one is the scientific management. So the second one is the bureaucratic organization, as well as the third one is the administrative management. So let's talk about the scientific management theory. So the scientific management, in a sense, so when we do something, we always talk about the scientific method, the scientific approach. So in that way, so when it comes to the management also, we say that you can apply the scientific method or systematic approach to the management. Right? So when we're talking about this scientific method, so there was a particular young engineer at that time, right? So he was searching about these poor management practices in an organization, in his own organization. He was a kind of an engineer. He worked into a kind of a small steel plant. And when he was working there, so he has realized when it comes to the production problem, when it comes to the success of the organization, so that is moreover depend on the management practices rather than the labor. He said he has realized that the failures of the organizations are there just because of management practices, not just because of the labor. So he realized, okay, so first what you have to understand is in order to improve the efficiency and the productivity of organization, first we have to think about a proper management practice. So this particular person is the Frederick W. Taylor, right? So he is the father of scientific management, as you all know. Right? So he is this particular engineer that I told you. Right? So he was studying about these scientific study. So this is how the scientific management came into the picture, right? So if you just think about the past, right? So if you just think about the past, the man has been first, and he said, but in the future, the process, the system must be the first. Right? So the Taylor is the person who taught this particular philosophy. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඉස්සර කතා කරනකොට ඒ කාලේ කිව්වේ මිනිස්සයා තමයි ඉදිරියෙන් ඉන්නේ, employee තමයි first කියලා. But then he has realized not the employees, it's the system. So at that time, Taylor said, so the past, the man has been the first. But when it comes to the future, the system must be the first. Right? So the scientific management started because of the things that he has seen and he has investigated in his particular organization. So as I said you before, it was a kind of a steel plant, right? So he just look at the processes. And so the scientific management was illustrated through this particular process. And he was looking at the way that they were unloading the iron from the rail cars as well as the reloading the finished steel product. Right? So this is what was happened, right? Make a steel plant company එකක් ඒකේ මොකද උනේ ඉස්සෙල්ලාම iron ගේනවා iron unload කරනවා rail එක එන්නේ පොඩි rail එක wheelbarrow එකක දාලා ඒකේ තමයි ගේන්නේ iron දාලා ඒකෙන් unload කරනවා unload කරලා process කරලා හදපු finish good එක finished steel එක load කරන upload කියන්නේ reload කරනවා. So this was happened in his organization. So Taylor, he calculated what is the correct movement tools and the sequence that each man can do and what were the processes that they have to do, right? එයා ඉස්සෙල්ලාම බැලුවා එක මිනිස්සෙක්ට කොච්චර ස්ටීල් ලෝඩ් කරන්න පුළුවන්ද ටන්ස් කොච්චර දවසකට කරන්න පුළුවන්ද මේක හොඳටම කරන්න පුළුවන් process එක මොකක්ද movement එක මොකක්ද sequence එක so what are the tools that they have to use he also work out on incentive systems paid for each man he said that if you pay this particular amount per day so then you can increase the productivity by this much so he just looked the process, right? So he just looked at the process and he identified whatever the task, right? And then this is what we call the scientific management, right? So when it comes to him, that we call it is him as the father of scientific management. Taylor was actually not alone, right? So in that area, so there were many people like Henry Gant and also the one we called last week, the Lillian and Gilbreth wife and husband, Itia Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. So they were also there in order to put some outputs into this particular theory. Right. So when it comes to the scientific management, Lamai, so the basically what happens is that you first identify the entire process and you identify the particular task. ඉස්සෙල්ලාම process එක අඳුර ගන්නවා task අඳුර ගන්නවා. ඊට පස්සේ අපි මේ task එකට ඕනේ මොන වගේ characteristics ද කියලා හොයනවා. ඊළඟට අපි ඒකට අදාළ කට්ටියව recruit කරනවා. So then we train them and give them incentives. So these are the process, these are the steps of scientific management, right? First you have to identify the task and then you have to identify whatever the characteristics that is required for this particular job role and then you recruit the people who have this particular characteristic and then you train them and in order to retain them you give them incentives. So these are the steps. So if we just think about the scientific management process, Lama, so even today, that you can see that when we even today we use these processes. So if you just think about recruiting an air hostess, right? Hitan air hostess කෙනෙක් හරි වෙන කවුරු හරි අපි සමහරලාට ඉංජිනේර කෙනෙක් යූස් ගන්නකොට සමහරලාට අපි කියනවා අපි air hostess කෙනෙක් කියන්නේ මෙයාට මේ height එක තියෙන්න ඕනේ. height එක අපි මයින් අර අතනින් load කරන්න පුළුවන් විදිහටනේ බඩු මේකට. එතකොට ඒකෙන් අපි කියනවා මේව තමයි තියෙන task. මේ task එක කරන්න මේ තියෙන capacities තියෙන කෙනෙක් ඕනේ. මේ තියෙන those may be the physical capacities as well as some of the other abilities. So anyway, that you have to understand that these are the things that is required by particular worker. ඊට පස්සේ ආව recruit කරාට පස්සේ අපි යාට training එකක් දෙනවා. ඕනම තැනක හැමෝම organization එකේ ආව train කරනවා. train කරාට පස්සේ ආව තියාගන්න අපි යාට bonus දෙනවා, salary increment දෙනවා. So these are the things happen. So when it comes to the scientific management, so if you just think about the today's scenario, so there are most of the organization, almost all the organization that they use the scientific management theory even today. So if you just think about the evolution of the management theory, so we are starting from the scientific management. So as I said before, so up to here that you have the classical perspectives, scientific management theory, administrative management, behavioral management, then you go to the managerial science and where we talk about the organization environment. So last week we have talked about the organization environment too. So this is what we have discussed. So the scientific management, so this was defined by this particular person who is known as the Frederick W. Taylor. So that was in the latter part of the 18th century. So that was a kind of a systematic study of the relationship between the people and the task, right? So he was talking about the process and he was thinking about redesigning the work in order to get a higher efficiency. So what are the principles or what are the 4 steps? So these are the 4 principles that we have discussed so far. And so we have to first study the way the job is performed. So you have to identify whatever the task, right? And then you have to determine new method into the rules. So you have to tell that whatever the things that you have to do, wherever the changes should be done. And you have to then select the workers who are skillful, skills match to the step two. And then once you have recruited them, then you have to establish a kind of a fair level of performance and payment. So that means you have to give them a good salary, as well as sometimes you have to motivate them through the bonuses. So these are known as the core principles of scientific management, right? So then thereafter, as I said you before, it's not only Frederick W. Taylor. So at that time, there were a lot of other people who were contributing to his theories, like Gang chart, who produced these gang chart. Gang chart, Henry Gantt. The Henry Gantt Gantt chart කියන එක ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැකලා ඇති. So it's a kind of a bar graph that measures the planned and completed work. So it says that the duration that it might take, and it's a kind of a small plan, right? And also there were many other important pioneers in this particular area. So the most important is the Gilbreths. So that means the husband and wife. So that was the team. So the Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. So when we're talking at that time, they were studying about the time and motion study. How did they go study time and motion study? මේ කියන්නේ ගොඩාක් කාලෙකට කලින් වෙච්ච දෙයක් ගැන ළමයි 1800 ගණන් වල වෙච්ච දේවල් ගැන අපි මේ කියන්නේ අපිට අද කතා කරනකොට මේවා පොඩක් පොඩි වගේ තේරුණාට ඒ කාලේ හොයාගත්ත පුංචි දේවල් වලින් තමයි මිනිස්සු ගොඩ බර ලොකු ගානකගේ ජීවිත බේරගෙන තිබිලා තියෙන්නේ ප්‍රොඩක්ෂන් එක වැඩි කරගෙන තියෙන්නේ දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මෙයාලගේ මේ motion study එකේදී කියන්නේ so when it comes to an operation table so they says that if you reduce the time that you keep the particular patient in an operation table so then you can increase the number of operations that you can do. So this is what they have realized, right? So through that they have saved number of patients' life, right? So this is what I wanted to tell you. So the time and motion study. So if you just think about the Gilbreth, so that they are known for his uh, uh, marvelous work towards the this medical surgery by drastically reducing the time this patient spent on operating tables. So the surgeons were able to save countless lives through the application of time and motion study. So when it comes to the Lillian and when it comes to Lillian Gilbreth, Lillian and Frank Gilbreth, so if you just think about the Lillian Gilbreth, so her contribution towards the human resource management is really, really high. Again, Frank Gilbreth, right? So when he was died, so at that time, Lillian Gilbreth had 12 kids, right? So she was more interested in the human aspects of work. When her husband died at the age of 56, so she had 12 children ranging from the ages from 2 to 90, right? So දැන් අවුරුදු දෙකේ ඉඳන් අවුරුදු 19 වෙනකල් වෙනස් වයස්වල ඉන්න ළමයි 12ක් ඉන්නවා කියන්නේ. So there is no one else know about the human resource than you. Right, so this is what happens to the Lillian Gilbreth, right? So, අර movie එකක් තියෙන Cheaper by the Dozen කියලා ඒක ගහලා තියෙන්නේ making inspiration අරගෙන, right? So if you just think about this particular lady, so she is the first lady of management, right? So if you just think about, she is the first professor who became the professor in a particular university when it comes to the management social science subject, right? So that's about the Gilbreth, so that they break down each action. So they found the better way so that they recognize each action to be more efficient. So when it comes to this particular operation, surgery table scenario, they said that you have to reduce this time. So this is why it is called as the motion study, time and motion study. So if you just think about the basic idea of the scientific management, so as I said you already, so what you have to do is that the managers, that they have to develop the standard methods for doing each job. So you have to select the workers with the appropriate ability, then you have to train them, they have to give the standard methods, and also they have to support the workers, that they have to eliminate whatever the interruptions, and also that they have to provide the incentives. So this is what we call as a scientific management. So the idea of the scientific management, so that is began with Taylor's, and it's dramatically increased the productivity across all the industry, right? So if you just think about today, as I said you before, they are still important. today, right? So that's about the scientific management. And now we are going to talk about the administrative management, where we are going to talk about the bureaucracy, right? So if you just think about the bureaucracy, so the Max Weber is the person who has identified this bureaucracy. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අද අපි bureaucracy ගැන කතා කරනකොට අපි එච්චර කැමති නෑනේ. අපි කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් government organization එකට ගියහම තමයි අපිට මේ bureaucracy කියන එක වැඩිපුරම දකින්න හම්බෙන්නේ. So we don't like it. We see that it's a kind of a stereotype. There is a kind of a red tape and you have to go through or අපි කියන්නේ හිතන්නකෝ ID එක ගන්න ගියාම මෙතන ඉඳන් උඩට යනවා උඩෙන් sign එක දාගෙන යටට එනවා. So we feel like it's a kind of an inefficient way. But when it comes to the time that it was introduced, right? So if you just think about the time that it was introduced to the world, so the idea was totally different, Lama. Right? So the Max Weber, he was a German person. He introduced most of the concepts on bureaucratic organization. So at that time, his idea was totally different. So if you just think about the 18th century, right? So if you just think about in UK and most of the European organization, so they were managed on personal as well as family-like basis, right? In a family-oriented business, තමයි තිබුණේ. එතකොට organization එකක top level එකට යනවා කියලා කියන්නේ ඒක family business එකකින් එන එකක්, family එකකින් එන එකක්. So employees were loyal to a single individual rather than to the organization, no, its mission. So most of the time that you get the promotions as well as incentives, recruitments, everything happens just because of this connection, not just through a process. So this is why Max Weber introduced this bureaucratic concept, right? So the Weber, so he introduced the organization that would be managed on an impersonal or the rational basis, right? So he said that organization is the most important part, right? So this is why he introduced the bureaucracy, right? So when we're talking about the bureaucracy, it's a kind of a formal structure and the positions are there rather than a particular person, right? So you know when it comes to a particular person, one ඉස්සෙල්ලත් කිව්වේ අර manager කෙනෙක් ගත්තාම manager කෙනෙක් එනවා යනවා organization එකක. So rather than rely on a particular person, an individual, so it's always recommended to rely on the structure of the organization, policy of the organization. So this is why he said that you should have a kind of a formal structure and the positions in your organization rather than to a particular person who may live or die in your organization. So the Weber, so he said that when it comes to an organization, so you have to select the employees that is based on their skills, not on who you know, right? So you shouldn't select the person that is based on their relationship with you, but based on their skills. So this is what he said, right? So you have to think about their competencies as well as the technical qualification. So that has to be assessed, that has to be transparent. So you can assess through by an examination or a kind of a training as well as experience. So you have to assess in a kind of a transparent way. So this is what he said. So when it comes to the organization, that you have to understand the organization, so they are relies on rules and written records for continuity. So this is what we call as the bureaucracy. So when it comes to the term bureaucracy, so if you just think about the today's scenario, as I said you before, so that has taken on a negative meaning in today's organization. But when it was starting, right, when we were initiating the concept, so it was associated with something nice. But if you just think about the today's scenario, we feel like that it is endless rule, red tape. So this is what we think about the bureaucracy, right? So if you just think about අපිට දැන් නම් bureaucracy එපා වෙලානේ තියෙන රජයේ ආයතන අනම්මනම් ඉඳ, so we have all been frustrated by waiting in long lines, or sometimes seemingly we are following some silly procedures, right? අපි සමහර ලාට හිතනනේ මේ signature එක මෙතනින්ම ගත්තා නම් ඉවරනේ, ඇයි මේ ආයි උඩට ගිහිල්ලා ආයි ගේන්නේ කියන සමහර තේින තේරුමක් නැති වැඩ අපි කරන රජයේ ආයතනවල. So the bureaucracy, sometimes we feel like that we are following seemingly silly procedures, right? But anyway, when it comes to the rules and the other bureaucratic procedures that they provided, standard way of dealing with the employees, right? So the most important part of bureaucracy is that everyone gets equal treatment. Everyone knows what the rules are, right? So this is what you should understand. So this is how the bureaucracy came into the picture, right? So when we're talking about the bureaucracy, Lama, so there are many principles. So basically, they have six principles, but in here for your level, we will be talking about just four principles. So when you're talking about the bureaucracy, so always that you should have written rules. So there are standard rules. So they say that these are the stuff that you have to do. So this is what you have to do. So these are the things that you have to follow, right? And also it has a hierarchy of authority. So it says the structure. So who report to whom, right? So that is their hierarchy. Positions organized in a kind of a hierarchy of authority, right? And also the fair evaluation and reward. So you evaluate who has the skill, who perform well, and the one who perform well get more, right? So that is their fair evaluation and reward. And also you have the system of task and the relationship. You say that this is the first task to be done, and this particular person is responsible for that. And once it is done, it has to be go to the second person. So this is the second person, he's responsible for this particular one. So that has to be written, right? So when it comes to the bureaucratic principles, so these stuff are there. So the hierarchy is there, managers subject to the rules and the procedures that are written, right? So the managers are separate from the ownership of the organization. So there are written rules and the administrative acts are there. So the decisions are recorded in writing. So everything is there. So if you just think about the people recruitment, so the personnel selected and promoted based on their technical qualification. And also sometimes you divide the labors, divisions of labor with a kind of a clear definition of authority and the responsibility. So these are the characteristics of the bureaucratic principle, right? And then we are going to talk about the Henry Fayol's principle. So when we're talking about the administrative principle, මම අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා කතා කරේ classical perspective එක ගැන කතා කරනකොට we said that we're going to talk about three things under the classical perspective. So the first one is the scientific management theory. Then we talk about the bureaucracy, and now we're going to talk about the administrative, little bit of an administrative principle. So when we're talking about the administrative principle, Amma, so it is basically focused on the total organization. So if you just think about the contribution to this particular approach, so that is included Henry Fayol as well as the Mary Marker Follett, and there was a particular person who was called as Chester Bernard. Right. So these are the three people who contributed into the administrative principles. Right. So when we're talking about the Henry Fayol's principle, so first let's talk about the Fayol's principle. Right. So he was also a kind of a mining engineer. He was a French person, French mining engineer. He worked his way up to become a head of the major mining group. Right. So when it comes to this particular person, he realized, right? So he wrote a particular book which is known as the General and Industrial Management, right? So in that particular book, Fayol discussed 14 general principles of management. He discussed about 14 principles of management. I don't know whether we have taken the 14 principles. Yeah, we have taken all 14 principles, right? So these are the 14 principles that has been given by Henry Fayol. මෙයා මෙන්න මේ කිව්වා මේ කියන concept පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් product අපේ companies වල efficiency එක වැඩි කරන්න කියලා. So these are the stuff. So the first one is the division of labor. Division of labor කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි. So you are dividing the labors based on the task. For an example, you just think that your organization is a garment factory. So you are making shirts. So when you're talking about this making shirts, so what you first do that you divide those tasks. So you say first I'm stitching the collar and then the buttons, and there will be people to stitch the sleeves. So then at the end of the day that they combine. So this is what happens. So you are dividing the labors based on these tasks. අපි ගන්නවා මෙහර කොලර් එක මහන්න කට්ටියක් ඉන්නවා එක assembly line එක පොලිමක් තියෙනවා garment එකේ ඒගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ කොලර් එක මහන්න එක. කට්ටියක් ඉන්නවා buttons අල්ලන. කට්ටියක් ඉන්නවා sleeves අල්ලන. Right? So there are people who have dedicated to that particular task. So this is known as a division of labor. So you allow for job specialization. So what happens? So you are dividing the labor that is based on their task. So when they do the same task again and again, so what will happen? They become specialized in. එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? ඒගොල්ලෝ මේකට ස්පෙෂලායිස්ඩ් වෙනවා. එතකොට ස්පෙෂලායිස්ඩ් වෙනවා කියන්නේ මොකද වෙන්නේ? ප්‍රොඩක්ටිවිටි එක මාර විදිහට වැඩි වෙනවා. So when I was talking about the Ford, මම අර කිව්වේ Ford ගේ කේස් එක මම එක එදා සප්ලයර්ස්ලා ගැන කතා කරනකොට වැනේඩියන් සී ගැන කතා කරේ. Right? So when it comes to the Ford, so apart from the supplies, right? So that was the first issue. ඒ කියන්නේ issues දෙකක් තිබ්බ කියවනේ. එකක් තමයි suppliers හොයාගන්න එක. අනිත් එක තමයි production issue එක. So at that time, as I said you before, so in the first organization, Henry Ford, that he had to leave the organization because he couldn't reach the target production. Why he couldn't reach the target production? ඒගොල්ලෝ ඔක්කොම කරේ මොකද්ද? ඔක්කොම 12 වැඩ කරා කියලා හිතන්නකො කීප දෙනෙක් ඒ ඔක්කොමලා එකතු වෙලා එක ඩිලිවරි වෑගන් එකක් හදනවා, ඩිලිවරි වෑන් එකක් හදනවා. ඒක අයින් කරනවා, ඒ කියන්නේ කාර් එකක් හදනවා, ඒක එළියට දානවා. ඊට පස්සේ ඔක්කොමලා එකතු වෙලා තව එකක් හදනවා. ওই විදිහටනේ කරා කියලා කිව්වේ. So then what happened? They could produce only dozen, I mean the 12 cars within a year. So then the production was not reached as the investors expected. So therefore, what he had to do, he had to leave the organization because the investors asked him to leave the organization. So then he went and he started his own business. So he has realized there is an issue in the production. So what he did, so he just went to visit some organization that has high production. ඒ වෙලාවේදී high production තියෙන organisation වලට ගියා. ගියේ automobile ඒවට නෙවෙයි. So he just went to the bakery organizations as well as the organization that is related to the food items because that their production was really huge at that time. ඒ වගේ ගිහිල්ලා බලනකොට තමයි ආ දැක්කේ assembly line කියලා ඒවා තියෙනවා. So there are particular line, particular people, employees that they are specialized in that particular task. So that the tasks are divided through the labels. So he is the first person, he's the first person who used these assembly lines in automobile industry. මොකද කරේ හරි wheels හදන්න වෙනම line එකක්, wheel alignment වලට ඊළඟට මේකට wipers හදලා ගෙවන්න එක්කෙනෙක්. හරි ඒ වගේ assembly lines දාලා අන්තිමට assemble කරලා එකට එකතු කරලා so they produce the cars in that way. So by adapting that particular process, what happens so that the Ford could produce more than 300 cars within a year, right? So this is what we call as the division of labor. Right, so the next thing is the authority and the responsibility. So that is the flip side of the coin. You know, when it comes to the organization, you should be given them with the authority as well as the responsibility. Because once you are getting an authority, you will be getting the responsibility too. Then the unity of the command. Right? So you know when it comes to the subordinate, each subordinate receives orders from one. And when we're talking about a particular group who get the orders from a one particular person, superior, so we call it as the unity of command. So normally when you are getting the commands from a one particular person, so you get the unity. So that's known as the unity of command. Right? And the next thing is the line of authority. So that means who report to whom. So the hierarchy. So a clear chain from top to bottom. So it says that who report to whom. Right? So that's known as the line of authority. And there is another concept which is known as a centralization. So the centralization in a sense that the authority that is centered into one particular person. So it's always focused to one particular person. So that's known as a centralization. So if we just think about the bureaucratic principle, right? So most of the time that you see a kind of a centralized nature, right? And the next thing is the unity of direction. So if you just think about the organization, sometimes there are similar activities in an organization that should be grouped together under one manager. So that's known as the unity of direction. And the next thing is the equity, right? So the equity in the sense that all the employees, that they should be treated fairly and justice has to be there. So the respect, right? So when you work more, so that you should be paid more, right? So this is what happens, right? This is what we call as equity. And the next thing is the order, right? So if you just think about each and every employee that they have to put where they have the most value. right? So that means the inclusivity කියලා අපි අද කතා කරන්නේ අන්න ඒක තමයි මේ OD එක කියලා කියන්නේ. So you are included in an organization. You have to be placed at the most suitable point that makes value to your organization. And then the initiatives, right? So අපි කිව්වේ entrepreneurship කියලා කිව්වේ, right? So you encourage the innovation within your organization. The new ideas are always welcome and embraced, right? And then the disciplines, right? So when it comes to an organization, disciplines are most part, because you have to have a kind of an environment where people are obedient, right? So that they are aligned, they respect to each other. So that's something you have to have disciplines. And then the remunerations of personnel. So when you work, so you're looking for the benefits. So the payments, so that is something really important. So the payment system that is contribute to the success of the organization. And then the stability of the tenure, right? So sometimes when it comes to an organization, you might see that the employee turnover is really high, because you're having some short-term contract and people do not trust the organization. They do not become loyal at that time. So therefore, what you have to have a tenures that with long-term employment contracts. That's something important. So then only you get this what you call ownership to the organization. අපේ කියන හැඟීම එන්නේ ගොඩ කාලයක් වැඩ කරොත්, right? And the next thing is the general interest over the individual interest, right? So when we're talking about the organization, I said rather than our individual goals, that we have to think about the organization goals. So this is why we say that the organization organizations take the actions in order to achieve the organization goals rather than the individuals. General interest over the individual interests, right? So those are the stuff that you have to understand. So the fourth one is where you have to share the enthusiasm or the devotion to the organization. So when you know, අර අපි කියන්නේ මොනවා තිබුණාත් වැඩන්නේ අපි කැමති නැත්නම් අපි එතන ඉන්න නරකයි කියලා. So you have to do a job that you like. So that is something important. තමන් කැමති නැති දෙයක් තමන් රස්සාව විදිහට තෝරගන්න නරකයි. So that is known as the spirit, and you have to share enthusiasm or devotion to the organization. So these are the 14 principles that has been given by Henry Fayol, right? Fayol felt that these principles should be applied in any organization setting. And also he is the one identified these functions, basic managerial functions. So Henry Fayol identified 5 basic functions that we call them as the elements of the management. So those are the planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. Right? So these functions that they underline much of the general approach that we use today in management theory. අපි අදත් පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ planning, organizing, leading and controlling කියලා මෙන්න මේ functions පහෙන් derive වෙච්ච ටික. So we have combined the commanding and coordinating into one, which is known as leading. Right. So if you just think about the base of the managerial functions that we studied today, the approach we use today is also based on whatever the things that has been given by Henry Fayol, right? So that's about it. And also when it comes to the Mary Marker Follett, so she also gave kind of a nice idea. Her work was popular with business people of her day. But if you just think about that, it was often overlooked by the management scholars, right? So most of the practical people that they liked Parker Follett, but not the theory people. Scholars la neve. හරිද මම කිව්වේ art එකක් කියලා කිව්වේ. That is the art of getting work done කියලා කිව්වේ. This Marker Follett, right? එයාගේ ඒව වැඩිපුර attract උනේ practical මිනිස්සුන්ට rather than the scholar. Right? So the Follett's idea served as the contrast to the scientific management, right? Her approach to leadership stressed that the importance of people rather than the engineering technique. Yeah, ඇත්තටම කිව්වේ technique එකට වඩා important වෙන්නේ මිනිස්සු කියන එක. She said that don't hug your blueprints, right? ඒ කියන්නේ තියෙන red code එක පොතේ තියෙන දේ hug කරන්න එපා practically, because you have to deal with people, right? So you have to get the work done with the people. So don't hug your blueprint, right? So that was there. So she asks always to analyze the dynamics of the management organization interaction, because there are people and you have to interact with them. So that is important. So the Follett addressed issues that are timely today. If you just think about the today things like ethics, power, and how to lead the way that encourage employees to give their best. So all these terms came from the this particular lady. I tell you Martha Follett. And now we are going to talk about the behavioral management. So we have talked about the classical perspective. So on the classical perspective, we talk about the administrative theories, scientific management theories, as well as bureaucratic management theories. So now we are going to talk about the humanistic perspective. So the human factor, right? So when we're talking about the Mary Mark Follett and the Chester Bernard, as I said you before, so they are the people who were early advocates of a more humanistic approach rather than the scientific approach or the classical perspectives. So the management here, what happens, so that they emphasize the importance of understanding the human behaviors, right? The human behaviors, their needs and their attitudes, what happens in the workplace, as well as the social interaction and the group processes. So this is what we call as the humanistic perspectives. So when we're talking about the human relationship movement, so here we talk about the behavioral management through. So that means you're trying to manage the people through the behavior, through their behavior. Okay, so when we're talking about this particular behavioral management, there is a particular study which is known as Hawthorne. I don't know whether I pronounced it correctly, but Hawthorne study. Right, so the Hawthorne study is a kind of a nice study. So that was happening 18th at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Right, so there was a kind of a struggle to develop the manufacturing of can it ඒ කාලේ කියන්නේ මම මේ කියන්නේ ඉලෙක්ට්‍රිසිටි එක හොයාගත්ත අලුත් හරිද මිනිස්සුන්ව manufacturing companies gas වලින් ඉලෙක්ට්‍රිසිටි වලට ගෙනියන්න පොඩ්ඩක් try කරන්න කියන්නේ උනා companies වලට කියන්නේ gas light එකක් වෙනුවට electric light එකක් දාන්න මිනිස්සුන්ව manufacturers ඒක costly නේ ඒ කියන්නේ මොකක් හරි manufacturing plant එක වැඩ කරනකොට ඒගොල්ලන්ට light ඕන වුණා. හරිද? ඒ light එක gas එකෙන් electricity එකකට ඉඳන් gas වලින් නම් electricity එකට වලට transfer වෙන්න පොඩක් companies එහෙම transfer කර ගන්න ටිකක් අමාරු වුණා. Right? So at that time, what happened? So the most of the electric companies that they wanted to prove that electricity is better than the anything else, and also when you are increasing the light, the intensity of the light, that increase the productivity. ඒක යක් පෙන්වන්න උනා light එක වැඩි වෙනකොට productivity එක වැඩි වෙනවා කියලා පෙන්වන්න ඕන වුණා. So this is what we call as the Hawthorne study. So the intention was that, but that was ended up with something else, right? So at that time, so what happened? So in beginning of the 19th century, as I said you before, so the people that they struggled to develop between the manufacture of gas and electric lighting fixtures for control of the residential and industrial market. So at that time, the electric companies that they have began a kind of a campaign to convince the industrial users that they need more light to get more productivity. Right? So that in order to do that, what they have done, that they have done a kind of a advertising campaign. They did a kind of an advertising campaign. That advertising did not work. Then what the industry did, that they began to using a kind of an experimental test to demonstrate their argument. හරිද? electric companies කියමු හරි electricity එක use කරනකොට ඔයගොල්ලන්ගේ productivity එක වැඩි වෙනවා. ඒ මොකද light එක වැඩි වෙනකොට productivity එක වැඩි වෙන හින්දා එහෙම කියලා ඒගොල්ලෝ advertise කරන්න පටන් ගත්තා. ඒ advertise කරාට වැඩේ හරි ගියේ නැහැ. එතකොට මොකද උනේ ඒගොල්ලෝ right අපි මේක prove කරලම පෙන්නමු කියලා lab එකේ prove කරන්න පටන් ගන්න ගියා. So this is what we call this particular study, right? So at that time, so this was actually done by a particular company called CIL, Committee on Industrial Lighting. At that time, Edison තමයි මේකේ honorary chairman වෙලා ඉන්නේ. හරිද? මම මේ කතා කරන්නේ එච්චර past එකක් ගැන. හරිද? Thomas Alva Edison, he was the honorary chairman of that time. So in the one particular location, Hawthorne කනේ plant එක Western Electric Company එකට අයිති වෙලා තිබ්බ මේ plant එකේ තමයි. So this particular study was there. ඒගොල්ලෝ කිව්ව හරිය. ඒගොල්ලෝ බැලුවා right වෙන වෙන light intensities වල මේගොල්ලෝ බැලුවහම productivity එක වැඩි වෙනවා. හරිද? intensity එක වැඩි වෙනකොට productivity එක වැඩි වෙනවා. ඒගොල්ලෝ කිව්වා right. So this is the look at this that when you are increasing the intensity, so that increase the productivity. Right? So this is what they said. ඒ වුණාට ඇත්තට මොකද උනේ? It was believed that the factor that best explained increased output was human relations because කියන්නේ මේකදී ඇත්තටම උනේ මොකද? ලයිට් එක වැඩි කරනකොට productivity එක වැඩි වෙනවා නෙමෙයි. ලයිට් එක වැඩි වෙනකොට මිනිස්සු හිතුවා තමන් මොනිටර් වෙනවා කියලා. හරිද? මේ පේනවා වැඩිනේ. එතකොට මිනිස්සු වැඩිපුර වැඩි කරන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. This is what was happened, right? So the researchers and scholars that they have realized that the researchers can influence the outcome of an experiment by looking at them too closely, right? So if you just look at the object too closely, then that can increase the productivity. So this was the phenomenon that came to be known as the Hawthorne effect in research methodology, right? So this approach, so that shaped the management theory and practices for for that particular century, right? So then the people started to believe on the human relation. So that is the best approach for increasing the productivity rather than anything else. Productivity increase කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා human relation එකෙන් ඒගොල්ලෝ තේරුම් ගත්තා. So then they have realized the importance of Marco Follett as well as Chester Bernard's idea, right? So that was there. And the next thing is where we are going to talk about the theory X and Y. මම අර කිව්වේ මිනිස්සු ගැන කතා කරනකොට there are two types of people කියලා මම කිව්වේ theory X and Y. අපි දැන් අර එක එක generations ගැන කතා කරන්නේ. අපි කියනවා baby boomers ලා ඉන්නවා, X කට්ටිය ඉන්නවා, Y කට්ටිය ඉන්නවා. millennials ලා ඉන්නවා, alpha කට්ටිය ඉන්නවා, then beta කට්ටිය ඉන්නවා. So we talk about the different generations. So when we're talking about these different generations, so their nature is different, and the way that they work, that the way that they think is totally different. So this is why the human resource perspective ගත්තහම, so this is why we are going to talk about this theory X and Y, right? So when we're talking about this particular perspective, so it's maintain the interest in the worker participation, right? So it's talk about two type of people, right? So when we're talking about this theory X and Y, there are two best known contributors, right? Not the theory X and Y. Human resource perspectives ගැන කතා කරනකොට we know that there are two main best known contributors, who is known as Abraham Maslow as well as Douglas MacGregor. Right, so this was given by this particular person who is known as Douglas MacGregor. Douglas MacGregor Androgana, there are people who call as theory X and Y. Right? He challenged both the classical perspective as well as the early human relationship theories. He said that when it comes to people, that MacGregor formulate his theory X and Y. He says that classical perspective was based on the theory X assumption about the workers, as well as if you just think about the slightly modified version of the theory X fit early human relation ideas, right? It can මිනිස්සු ජාති දෙකක් කියනවා theory X and Y. Theory X කියලා කියන්නේ when it comes to the average human being, so that they don't like to work, right? ඒක තමයි කියන්නේ, right? සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි ගත්තොත් rationally human being එක as they inherent the dislike of work, and they always try to avoid as much as possible. Because when it comes to the human characteristics, they don't like to work. So this is what he said, right? Theory X එකේදී කියන්නේ කියනවා theory X Y කියලා දෙකක් කියනවා. Theory X එකේදී කියන්නේ assumption එක තමයි මිනිස්සු කියන්නේ වැඩ කරන්න කැමති නැති කට්ටිය. Right? So they inherit the dislike of work. So they always try to avoid them, right? So because human characteristics always is dislike for work. Right? So therefore, what you have to do, most people must be controlled, monitored, threatened, and the punishment should be given in order to get the work done. Right? So if you just think about the average human being, that they prefers to be directed, that they wishes to avoid the responsibilities, that they have relatively little ambition, they want security above all of them, right? So this is the nature of the average human being. right? කියන්නේ එයා කියනවා මිනිස්සු වැඩ කරන්න කැමති නෑ. මිනිස්සු naturally කැමති තමන්ව කවුරු හරි control කරනවට. තමන්ගේ job security එක ගැන විතරයි ඒගොල්ලෝ හිතන්නේ. output එකක් ගන්න නම් ඒගොල්ලන්ව monitor කරන්න ඕනේ, control කරන්න ඕනේ. So that has to be done. So this is what we call as the theory X. So the theory Y is totally different from the theory X. So that is the total opposite, right? So here we say that the people like to work. So the expenditure of physical and mental effort in work is natural as a particular play or rest, right? So what happens? So when you're talking about the average human being, that they do not inherit the dislike work. So this is what they say. Theory Y වල කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ work කරන්න කැමති. So we assume the workers are not lazy, right? They want to do a good job and they do their job itself because that they create happiness. The workers like the work, right? දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට theory X ගත්තොත් අපි හිතමු ස්කිල් නැති අපි හිතනවා තේ හදන්න ඊළඟට ක්ලීනින් කරන මිනිස්සු සමහර වෙලාවට ඉන්න පුළුවන් theory X, so you have to monitor them. But when it comes to the software engineer සමහර වෙලාවට ඒක develop කරලා එයාට සතුටක් එනවා. So this is theory Y, right? So when we're talking about the people, right, so this is what it says. So when it comes to the theory X, so we assume that the average worker is lazy. So when it comes to the theory Y, we assume the workers are not lazy. So this is about theory X and the theory Y. So this is what McGregor has given. So when it comes to the theory X, we say that the employees are lazy. So the managers must closely supervise them, monitor them. So they have to create strict rules and they have to control them through the rules and regulations. And then you have the theory Y. So here we say that the employees are not lazy. So you can give them more freedom, right? Freedom. If you just think about the software engineers, most of the time we facilitate the work from home, right? So that's there. So most create work setting to build initiatives. So we provide them the authority and freedom is given. So that's about it, right? And now after McGregor's theory, we're going to talk about some of the scenarios that we have used even today, right? So if you just think about the management science perspectives. So right after the World War II, right? So there were many changes that taken place in the management, right? So this is what we call as the management science perspective, right? So it was there to address many of the problems that we had at that time, right? So you know that most of the application of mathematics, statistics, and the quantitative techniques in the management decision so was taken place at this time, right? So එකනේ දැන් World War II එකෙන් පස්සේ හරිද ඊළඟට ඔය නියුක්ලියර් මේවා ඒව හදද්දී so the management වලටත් එන්න පටන් ගත්තා mathematics කියන එක statistics quantitative techniques එකට එන්න පටන් ගත්තා. So this is why operation management කියලා එන්නේ and total quality management, Six Sigma, ඔය කියන concepts ඔක්කොම ආවේ එතකොට, right? So the decision making, problem solving, right? So the quantitative management, operation management, total quality management, management information systems all came into the picture, right? So if you just think about the operational management, like it was a kind of a new field that came at that time, right? So the people specialized in the physical production of the goods and services. So they have used the quantitative techniques in order to reduce the defects. The quality improve color defects adu karana Six Sigma volume concepts, total quality management, all this came into the picture. So this is where we have used the quantitative techniques in managing people. So management science. Right. And there is something called contingency theory. Contingency theory කියලා කියන්නේ so we feel that there's nothing called entirely correct. හරිද contingency කියලා කියන්නේ situation එකත් එක්ක වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන් කියන එක. Right? So sometimes you have to change the theories according to the situation. So the contingency means that the managers that they have to respond that is depend on the whatever the situation of the organization. For an example, if you just think about a consultant, that they might mistakenly recommend the same management by objective systems for the manufacturing firm that was successful in a kind of a school system. So the situation is totally different. So you have to change your the way you manage. So that's known as the contingency weave. So it's a kind of a contemporary extension. So the way that you're going to change based on the situation. So when it comes to the organization, so the environmental factors are there. So they impact towards the organization and management. So that in that case, you have to be flexible to react to the dynamic environmental changes. So this is why we have a contingency. So you have to change rapidly. So that's known as the contingency theory. So if you just think about the today's scenario, so we have many uh, turbulences. So therefore, you have to rapidly change your decisions. So this is what we need contingency theory. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි කවදාවත් හිතුවේ නෑනේ අර වගේ කොවිඩ් වගේ එකක් ඇවිල්ලා මුළු ලෝකෙම මිනිස්සු ඇතුළට වෙලා ප්‍රොඩක්ෂන් එක නවත්තගෙන මෙහෙම වෙයි කියලා. We never thought of something like that. We might have some kind of issue like that in 20th century. We never thought, but it was happened, right? So we don't know what will happen in next decades to come, right? So the things are changing. So this is why we say that we are in a kind of environment that rapidly changes. So therefore, you have to change your theories accordingly. So this is what we call as contingency theory. So with that, we have come to the end of that particular chapter. So let's talk about the questions. So here, according to the Douglas McGregor, theory Y assumes that the average worker is not lazy. So the first answer is not correct. So they need to closely supervise. No, they don't need, because they are not lazy. So you can give more authority to them. So you can give more flexible work hours. Can be given more authority. So this is the correct answer. Right, so they do not need strict rules and the defined reward. So all the other three is aligned with the theory. Bye. So here I'm asking you to explain how Douglas McGregor described the human behavior. So we have described the theory X and the theory Y. So theory X says that the average human being, when we're talking about them, that they are lazy, so they need to be monitored closely and all this stuff. And you have described the things that we have studied so far. And here I'm asking you to describe the contemporary extensions to the management. So those are the scientific managing by science. So that means where you have used these quantitative techniques in management, like operation management, operation decisions, total quality management. So you can describe all sort of stuff. Okay, so with that, we have come to the end of that particular chapter. And let me go to the next one. 1 second now. Okay, let's talk about the managerial functions, right? So when we're talking about the managerial functions, so as I said to you before, so that the Henry Fayol is the person who have introduced this managerial function, right? So he said that he introduced actually 5 functions, but we have coordinated this communication and the coordination into one particular. We have combined the coordination as well as the communication into a one particular a function which is known as leading. So let's talk about the first function. So the planning, organizing, leading, controlling කියලා functions හතරක් තියෙනවා. So in here, this particular lesson, we will be talking about the planning, right? So when we're talking about planning, so but why the plans are need? What is it known by the planning? So let's talk about the planning process. ළමයි මම අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා කිව්වා වගේ, so when it comes to an organization, it is really important to have a plan, because plan is the blueprint of your organization. So it doesn't matter whoever. මොකද So when we're talking about the planning, that's something really important because the plan is a kind of a blueprint. So it is written. So whoever the managers, so we know that the managers that they come and leave the organization, they might sometimes die. So you cannot totally depend on the managers. So there should be a kind of a framework or a kind of a written framework that any manager can follow. So this is what we call as the plan. So plan is a kind of written blueprint of your organization. So it says whatever the things that you're going to do, uh, who you are going to be right after a certain period of a time, and the way that you're going to do it. So this is there in your plan. මම මොකද කරන්නේ අවුරුදු 5කට 6කට පස්සේ මම කොතනද ඉන්න ඕනේ ඒක කරන්නේ කොහොමද? So the strategies should be there. So this is what we call as the plan. So when we're talking about the planning, so that is the process that the managers have to identify whatever the goals that they're going to achieve in future, as well as the way that they're going to achieve these goals. මගේ goals මොනවාද මම achieve කරගන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එක කියන්න ඕනේ. So in order to do that, ළමයි, so if you just think about yourself, it's not only the organizations, but also if you just think about you as an individual, I as an individual, we all have plans. We all have plans for our future. අපි හිතනෝනේ අපි අවුරුදු දෙකකින් තව මේව කරනවා, අවුරුදු පහකින් තව මේක කරනවා. So we have plans for us as well as sometimes for our kids. So when we are making the plans, so how can we do that? So first you have to do a situation analysis. You have to understand who you are, what are my strengths, what are my skills, what are my weaknesses, how can I improve my weaknesses, how can I reduce my weaknesses and improve my strengths in order to achieve the goal. So what are the things that should be done? So this is what we call as the planning process. So the planning process, in a sense, first you identify who you are today. And then you have to tell what I'm going to do right after a certain period of time. And then you have to tell how I'm going to do that. So this is what we call the planning process. And also the planning process should say that how can I compare whether I have achieved it or not. Controlling කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එක ඔයා මේ planning process එකේ ලියන්න ඕනේ. So when we're talking about the planning process, Lama, so it describes all the activities that you're going to talk about in here. Right? So that means it should say the organizing, leading, and controlling. So this is why we call it as the planning process. So you always describe it just before it happens. So when we're talking about the planning process, it has 3 steps. So the first one is that you have to define the organizational mission and goals. And then you have to develop the strategies. Goals, sorry. goals මොනවාද කියලා කියන එක. ඊට පස්සේ මේ goals achieve කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එක. ඒක තමයි strategy formulation. ඊට පස්සේ අපි ඒක කරන එක strategy implementation. So there are 3 steps in the planning process. So the first one is, the first step is that you have to determine whatever the organization mission and goals. Then you have to tell that how you are going to achieve this organizational goals. So that means the strategies and the tools that you're going to use. So that you have to formulate the strategies, and then you have to implement your strategies. So these are the 3 steps of the planning process. So when we're talking about the planning process, there are certain levels of planning, Lamai. So we call that, means this is something aligned with the level of management, top level, middle level, and the front line. So the people, as I said you before, who, if you are a manager, irrespective to whatever the level that you deal with, that you have to plan. Right? So it doesn't matter whether you are in the top level, middle level, or the front level, but you have to plan. So this is what we said. So the people at the corporate level, so that the top level, that they have the corporate level plan. So the people at the middle level, that they have business level plan. So the people at the front level, that they have the functional plan. Right? So this is what we call as the level of planning: corporate level plan, business level plans, as well as the functional level plan. Right? So when we're talking about the goals that you have in the corporate level planning, so when you're talking about the goals that you're having at the corporate level, so we call them as the corporate mission and the goals. And then you have the corporate level strategy, and then you design for the corporate structure control. So these are the stuff that we said, that based on the level that your goals, strategies, as well as strategy formulation and the implementation would be changed. So this is the stuff. So these are the levels of planning. So what are them? Corporate level planning, business level planning, and the function level planning. So when we're talking about the corporate level, so as I said you before, that the decisions mostly taken by the top managers, right? So mostly taken by the top managers. But when it comes to the business level, so the managers at the business level that they take these decisions. So they are sometimes they are long-term goals and structure. Right? Top managers are ගන්න මුළු organization එකටම. So this is the plan that for the entire organization. So you consider the entire business, whether you into which what are the new business that you're going to have, right? So how you're going to do that, whether you're going to merge with another business. So these are the corporate level decisions. So the business level, in a sense, so at the business level, so how you operate. So whatever the plans. Functional level කියලා කියන්නේ sales plan එකක් වගේ එකක්. So this is the functional level. So when you're talking about the plans, Lama, you can categorize. You can categorize the plans that is based on the level as well as based on the time. අපි මේ කතා කරන්නේ different types of plans ගැනනේ, planning as well as plan ගැන. So when we're talking about these plans, you can categorize the plans based on the time too. So if you just categorize them based on the time, so we say that you can have three types of plans like long term, intermediate, and short term. So the long term, in a sense, if your plan works for more than 5 years, so we call it as long term. So if your plan is only for a 1 year, we call it as an annual plan. So it's a kind of a short term, it's an annual plan. So if it's less than that, we call it as a short term plan. අවුරුද්දකටත් වඩා අඩුයි නම් අපි ඒකට කියනවා short term plan එකක් කියලා. So if it's between 1 year to 5 years, so we call it as an intermediate term. So if it goes more than 5 years, so we call them as a long term plan. So you might have long term plans, you might have intermediate term plans, as well as you might have short term plan. So if you just think about most of the functional level plans, so they are short term. Most of the middle level, business level plans, so they are intermediate. And most of the corporate level plan, they are long term, right? So this is what you have to understand. And also when it comes to the firms, sometimes that they have a rolling plan. Again, when you won't be able to achieve the organizational goals within the stipulated time, so what you have to do, so you can extend your plan. So you are adding some other objectives and you are extending your project. So that's known as a rolling plan. So it's a kind of a cycle to amend plans constantly. So you're constantly changing your plan, and we call it as a rolling plan. And also, when it comes to the plans, sometimes you can describe the plans, you can categorize the plans into two categories that is based on their nature or the purpose. So we call some are standing plans, some are single-use plans. Standing plan එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ, so you use it over and over. So it's a kind of a standard plan that you have. අපි හිතමු budget plan එක ආයෙ අපි use කරනවා. So it's a kind of a program decision. So the managers that they develop some kind of policies, rules, as well as some kind of procedures in your organization. So you can use it over time. So these are known as standing plans, right? So if you just think about normal rules that kind of specific guidelines in your organization. So if you just think about the accounting policies, accounting standards. So these are standing plans, right? And a single-use plan, in a sense, so that is for a specific reason, right? So you use it for a one time and then you do not use it again, right? So we call them as single-use plan. So when we're talking about the single-use plan, so they develop for a one time, right? So these are kind of non-program issues, right? So normally we call them like projects, programs, right? So you are having a particular plan project. Project එකකට ගන්නවා ඒක project එකේ තියා ගන්නවා, right? So that's no project එක ඉවරුණා මේ plan එක ඉවරයි. So that's about this. One second. You can. So that's about the single-use plans, so the programs and the projects. A second. And why the planning is important, right? I plan එකක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ organization එකකට. So when we're talking about an organization, ළමයි, so as I said you before, මම අර කිව්වා වගේ මිනිස්සු එන යනවා, managers ලා එන යනවා, employees ලා එන යනවා, but you cannot stop the functions of your organization just because of your employees or the managers. So you should have plan for the organization because it describes the future of the organization, not the future of employees or the managers. So the organization is a different entity. So the planning determines where the organization is now and where it will be in the future. So that's something important. So the organization එක different entity එකක් විදිහට achieve කරන්න යන්නේ මොනවද කියලා තියෙන්නේ plan එකේ. So the planning is important. And when you are having a plan ළමයි, it says whoever do whatever the task. කවුද මොනවද කරන්න කියලා කියනවා. එතකොට හැමෝම include organization structure එකේ. So the participation is there. All the managers are involved, not only the managers, but also all the employees are involved in planning. So it describes whoever the people should, whatever the task that should be executed by those people who involved in this organization. Participation is there. And also the sense of direction and purpose. It says whose responsibility is this, right? Planning sets the goals and strategies for all the managers. So that is there. Okay. And then the coordination. So the plan says that this is how the marketing department and finance department coordinates, right? So all the all the departments, all parts of the firms, that they have to understand that how they are connecting with each other. So that's known as the coordination. And then you have the controlling. Plan say, plan එකේ තියෙනවා හරි මම මේක achieve කරනවද නැද්ද කියන එක මම කොහොමද check කරන්නේ? Because I have the goals and I know the current things. So this is how we're going to assess it. So this has to be described. So the controlling plan specify who is in charge of accomplishing the goals, who should control it, how you're going to control it, everything is there. And there is something special which is known as scenario planning කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. Scenario planning කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි, so you know when it comes to the future, it's not something certain. But the certain එකක් නෙවෙයි. It might change. Right, so when we're talking about the future, so that might be good or bad, right? So it's very uncertain. So in that case, you can develop scenarios. You generate several forecasts for the different future conditions, and then you have plans for those two different conditions. දැන් හිතන්නකෝ අපි කියන හරි crisis එකක් ආවොත් අපි මෙන්න මේ plan එකට යනවා. boom එකකට තිබ්බොත් හොඳ වුණොත් අපි මෙන්න මේ plan එකට යනවා. So that's known as the scenario planning. So this kind of a planning that we're looking towards, we're trying to get ready for the future. The future is unknown. No, you don't know whether the future will be good or bad. So you are having multiple possible future chances, options, and we can see how our plans might work in each. Right, so this is what we call as the scenario planning for different scenarios, right? So we take the different future scenarios and we take different plans for different future scenarios. And when we're talking about the planning process, I said that there are 3 steps. So the first one is that you have to determine your mission and goals. So the second one, you have to develop your strategies, and the third one is the implementation. So let's first talk about the determination of the mission and the goals. So that means you have to define your mission and the goals. So when we're talking about the organization, Lama, so it has a kind of an hierarchy. First, you have the vision, ඊට පස්සේ තියෙනවා mission එක, ඊට පස්සේ තියෙනවා goals. Vision එක කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි, so once you close your eyes that you have a kind of a nice dream about your organization. So that's known as the vision. So that definition was given by Walt Disney. එයා තමන් press interview එකකදී මොකක්ද ඔයාගේ vision එක කියලා අහුවාම එයා කියනවා ඔයා ඕනම කෙනෙක් තමන්ගේ ඇස් දෙක වහගත්තාම තමන්ට හීනයක් පේනවා. අන්න ඒක තමයි තමන්ගේ vision එක. But when it comes to these dreams, so it has no scope. It has no definition, right? සමහර වෙලාවට හැබැයි වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, ඇත්ත වෙන්න නොවෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. So this is why when we're talking about the vision, we say we don't have a scope. So sometimes it might be realistic, sometimes it might not. But when it comes to the mission, it's not something like vision. So when it comes to the mission, so that is the purpose of your organization. Your organization is there in order to achieve that particular mission. So when it comes to the mission, it's a kind of a long-term objective of your organization. It says what you're going to achieve right after 5 or 10 years, who you want to be after 5 or 10 years. So it's a kind of a long term. You won't be able to achieve the mission within 2-3 years. So it takes time. And also once you achieve your mission, so you have to change it. Right? So this is what you have to do. So anyway, so the mission is the purpose of your organization. So it describes whatever the goods and services that you produce and how your goods and services are different from your competitors. What are the value that you create to your customers? Who are your customers? Right? So everything is there in your mission. So it describes the purpose of your organization. Then right after the mission, you have your goals. Goals can short term evan. So we said that the goal should be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. So the smart goals. So when you are achieving the goal, so that means you are going to achieve the mission in a certain day. So the goals that हम organization එක the goals ගොඩාක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? මේ goals achieve කරලා, so you get given assurance that you are going to achieve the mission right after 5 or 10 years of time, right? So that's about the goals. Again, අපි mission එක කෑලි වලට කඩලා submission කිව්වොත් අන්න ඒව තමයි අපි goals කියලා කියන්නේ. So when we're talking about this planning process, so the first step is that you have to determine your mission and goals. So first you have to determine your mission in a sense that you have to define your business. So the purpose of your organization, so why it is existing and who are your competitors. So you have to describe everything. And then you have to establish your major goals. So you have to tell who will compete in business, and you have to tell that the whatever the things that you're going to achieve within them per particular period of time. Right? So the SMART objectives are there. And then you have to develop your strategies. So, second step is strategy formulation. Right? So the strategy formulation in a sense that you have your objectives or the goals. Now you have to tell that how I'm going to achieve my organizational goals. Right? So you have to tell them. So that's known as the strategy formulation. Tools tactics mama use කරන්න. ඒක කියන්න කලින්, so you have to have an idea about your organization. So you have to do a SWOT analysis. මේක තමයි අපි කියන situation analysis එකක් කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා plan එකකදී planning එකක් කරද්දී situation analysis එකක් කියන එක compulsory. We are doing a situation analysis in order to understand your strengths and weaknesses as well as opportunities and threats in the market. අපි අඳුර ගන්නවා strength and weaknesses. අපේ strength and weaknesses මොනවාද, market එකේ තියෙන opportunities and threats මොනවාද කියලා. අපේ weaknesses තියෙනවා නම් අපි ඒව convert කරනවා strengths වලට. අපේ opportunities එක්ක අපි අපේ strengths match කරනවා. මේක තමයි අපි කරන්නේ. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් අපිට හිතුනොත් අපිට දැන් අපි යුනිවර්සිටි එකක් කියලා අපි හිතනවා right අපිට PhD තියෙන lecturers ලා අඩුයි. එහෙනම් අපි PhD තියෙන අයව කරනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි weakness එක strength එකකට ගන්නවා. ඊළඟට market එකේ බැලුවම opportunities තියෙන අලුත් degree programs වලට අපි පටන් ගන්නවා. ඒ opportunity එක අපි හදාගන්න එක. ඒ opportunity එකට match කරන්න අපි අලුතෙන් lecturers ලා recruit කරනවා, match කරනවා. So this is what happened. So you are converting your weaknesses into strength and you are matching your opportunities with the strength. Sometimes there are managers who can convert the threats into the opportunities, and sometimes managers ignore the threats. So this is what happens in SWOT analysis. Okay, converting weaknesses into strength and converting the threats into the opportunities or ignoring threats. And also you have to match the strength with the opportunities. So this is what we call as the SWOT analysis. Through the SWOT analysis, now you have to think about whatever the strategies or the functions or the tools that you're going to use to achieve your organizational goals, right? So when we're talking about the planning and strategy formulation, so as I said you before, so once you have done the SWOT analysis, so you have the different level of strategies. Are corporate level planning, business level planning, functional level planning, ඒගොල්ලෝ හදන strategies වලට අපි කියනවා corporate level strategies, business level strategies, as well as functional level strategies. So the corporate level strategies, in a sense that you develop the actions to maximize the long run, right? So you have the long time objectives, and in order to achieve the long time goals, that you have to have corporate level strategies. So just like the business as well as the functional level strategies. And when we're talking about the organization, Lamai, so when you are analyzing the organization, monkey one, ඔයා අඳුර ගන්න ඕනේ ඔයාගේ strength and weaknesses ඉස්සෙල්ලාම. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාගේ strength and weaknesses කියලා කියන්නේ මොනවද? Internal environment එකේ. So who are your employees? Who are your board of directors? What are the skills that they have, and what is your organizational structure, what are the resources that you have, what is the technology that you use. So by analyzing these stuff, you will be getting the strength and weaknesses within your organization. දැන් ඊට පස්සේ එළියට ගියාම අපි organization environment එක ගැන කතා කරේ. So once you go out, then you will be able to analyze the micro and the macro environment. ඒකේ තමයි තියෙන්නේ opportunities and threats. So this is what we call as the micro environment. මේ තියෙන micro environment. ඒ කියන්නේ factors that immediately impact towards the organization කියලා අපි කිව්වේ. Micro factors එහෙම නැත්නම් task environment එක කිව්වේ. මෙන්න මේ තියෙන ඒක analyze කරන විදිය. So in order to analyze the micro environment, you can have the Porter's 5 forces. Porterගේ 5 forces වලදී අපි කියනවා micro factors මොනවාද impact කරන්න පුළුවන් organization එකට කියලා. So කාටද impact කරන්න පුළුවන් micro factors කවුද? suppliers ලා ඉන්නවා, buyers ලා ඉන්නවා, competitors ලා ඉන්නවා, substitutes තියෙනවා, new entry ඉන්නවා. So these are the factors that can immediately impact towards your organization. So you have to analyze them. So you have to understand who are your customers, what are their needs, how their needs are changing. හරිද? මම දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට හිතන්නකෝ ක්‍රීම් සෝඩා නම් ක්‍රීම් සෝඩා මගේ කස්ටමර්ස්ලා කවුද? young customers ලා තමයි මට ඉන්නේ. ඒගොල්ලන් change වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? දැන් ඒගොල්ලොත් more towards health conscious. හිතන්න ඕනේ අන්න අපේ customers ලා ගැන. So they are bargaining power. So how they impact towards our business. So who are our suppliers? We get water from them, we get the bottle from them, we get the leads from these people. So these are our suppliers. So මෙන්න මේ විදිහට ඔයගොල්ලෝ model එකට දානවා. So you just think about the micro environment in order to understand the opportunities and threats in the market. Right? So these are the 5 forces. So the level of rivalry in the industry. So that means the competitors. How intense is the current competition with the competitors? In some conditions, in some organizations, for some products and services, you have a huge competition. For some of the products and services, you don't have a competition at all. For an example, if you just think about Sri Lankan railway industry, they don't have a competition at all, right? So if you just, තියෙනවා තමයි අපි අර highway එක ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා, private transports තියෙනවා. ඒ වුණාට ඒ ආරෙන්න railway එකට වෙන option එකක් හරිය substitute එකක් මිනිස්සුන්ට නැහැ. ඊළඟට electricity එක ගත්තාම LECO and CEBRN, there is no any other competition. So this is why that their bargaining power is really high. Right? And potential for entry, new entries, right? So in some cases, for some industry, it is easy to get into that particular industry. But if you just think about the energy sector, then electricity එක වගේවට එන්න අලුතෙන් හරි අමාරුයි. හරි? But if you just think about soda, මොකක් හරි අපි හිතමු soft drink එකක් හදන්න ඊට වඩා ලේසි. So potential for entry. And also the power of supply. So when it comes to the supplies, who are the people who give us the supplies, raw material for organization. So when you have few suppliers, what happens? පොඩ්ඩ දෙනෙක් ගෙන්නන් ගන්නේ එයාලගේ bargaining power එක වැඩි. සමහර ලාට එක්කෙනෙක් ගෙන්නන් ගත්තේ එයාගේ bargaining power එක ගොඩක් වැඩි. So when we're talking about that vanadium steel වෙලාවේ අපි කියව Flannery brothers වලින් විතරයි ගත්තේ. So then at that time their bargaining power is really really high. Power of suppliers and also the power of buyers. ඒ විතරක් නෙවෙයි Flannery brothers ලා දුන්නේ Panama Canal එකයි Ford ලටයි විතරයි. එතකොට Ford ලා ගත්තේ නැත්. ඒ වෙලාවේදී Flannery brothers ලට ප්‍රශ්නය. So the power of buyers. So when it comes to the organization like McDonald's and the Burger King, so that they purchase meat and potatoes as well as cheese in bulk. So when it comes to the farmers, right? So they are but in that case, buyers are the McDonald's and the Burger King. So the farmers are the dairy farmers are there and potato farmers are there. They are the people who supply them. In that case, as a buyer, McDonald's as well as Burger King's, their power is really high. The power of buyer is really high because you have only few, but they are large buyers. They buy in large quantities. And also the substitutes. So when it comes to the substitutes, so the people who drink the milk powder, produce the milk powder, that they should understand, okay, now the fresh juice as well as the malted milk, so that they become substitute for milk powder. So you have to think about this. And by considering this, may 5 forces keep micro factors, macro factors, press factors, political, economical, social, and technology factors. So how those factors impact towards your business. By analyzing all this stuff, you can identify the opportunities and threats in the market. By analyzing your internal environment, your skills, your infrastructures, your procurement, your HR, analyzing those stuff, you can get your strengths and weaknesses. So once you have that, you can do a SWOT analysis. So then you can implement your, formulate your strategies. So when we're talking about the strategies, so as I said you before, you can have corporate level strategies, business level strategies, as well as frontline strategies. So in here, this particular slide, so what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to give you kind of an example, examples for the corporate level strategies as well as business level and frontline strategies. Corporate level strategy කියන්නේ, so this is the strategy that is governed, that is applicable for the entire organization. So the future of your organization is determined by your corporate level strategy. So whether you are stick to a one single business or whether you are going to diversify, so it's a kind of corporate level strategy. ඒ කියන්නේ උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් අපි හිතමු ජෝන් කීල්ස්. ජෝන් කීල්ස් හිතනවා රයිට් අපි ඉන්නේ කීල්ස් විතරක්ද නැත්නම් අපි හැම ඉන්ඩස්ට්‍රි එකකටම යනවාද? අපි ෆාමසිටිකල් යනවා, අපි හොටෙල්ස් යනවා, අපි ඊළඟට banking යනවා, right? So you are diversifying. If you just think about the John Keys, that they have diversified their business into many areas, like that they have supermarket chain Keys, that they have NTB Bank, and they have their own, what do you call, hotel channel, pharmaceutical company, everything is there. So that they are diversified, right? So whether you are going to stick to one business, if you just think about the McDonald's, so that they have only focus on the fast food businesses, Burger King only fast food business. Right? So you have to think about whether you are going to focus on a one single business or whether you are going to diversify into many business. So that's strategic, corporate level strategy, right? That's a strategic decision you have to take at the corporate level, right? So if you just think about a single business unit, when you are having a single business unit, what will happen? So your risk is high. ඒ කියන්නේ ළමයි අර අපි අහලා තියෙන, so when we talking about the eggs අර අපි කියනවා අපි egg එක basket එකක egg තියනවට වඩා තැන් තැන් වල තිබ්බොත් ඒක හොඳයි කියලා අපි කියනවා, because when you put your all eggs in a one basket, so what will happen? If you drop the basket, you will lose all the eggs. So rather than keeping all the eggs in one basket, it is recommended to keep the eggs in different places, because then you can at least protect the eggs that you have kept in different places. So this is what happens in the investment. So when you are investing, rather than investing in a one particular business, so it's always recommended to invest in different business, because then when a one particular business is losing, you can compensate it by another business. For an example, if you just think about the COVID situation, at the COVID time, there was a huge decline in the tourism sector. Right? So the people who have invested in this tourism sector, that they got a huge loss. So at that time, if you have had invested in tourism as well as the pharmaceutical companies, what will happen? Although you have lost in tourism, but you may be able to compensate your loss by the gain that you get through the pharmaceutical companies, right? So this is why it's recommended to invest in many business. Diversification is recommended rather than the single business. You can mitigate the risk. Still, Rama, you have to understand when it comes to the diversification. So it's not always good for all the businesses. Sometimes when you are diversifying, that you might not be able to control your business, right? So in that case, if you just think about the Sri Lanka, so there are two nice examples like EAP as well as Selinco. Right? So what happened to them because of this uncontrollable diversification? Right? So when we're talking about the diversification, so you can diversify it with the related business as well as unrelated business. Related diversification, for an example, if you just think about Sampath Bank, now they are in the Sampath Bank and they go to the leasing. So that they go to something related to the finance. So it's a related diversification. But if you just think about the Cargill's Food City, that they were in the retail channel and they started Cargill's banking, that is totally different. So it's known as an unrelated diversification. Okay, related diversification and unrelated diversification. So these are the type of strategies that the corporate level strategies. And also, if you just think about whether you are going to have a global strategy or multi-domestic strategy, කියන්නේ අපි කියන අපේ organization එක දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට Coca-Cola ගත්තා. කොහේ ගියත් Coca-Cola බෝතලේ එක විදියයි. කොහේ ගියත් Coca-Cola make content ඒ කියන්නේ ingredients of Coca-Cola hadana ekama. So it's a kind of a global standard product. So it's a global strategy. And then Sometimes you decide, okay, no, we are going to have a multi-domestic strategy. So for an example, so the McDonald's for India, it's not the beef burger that we are going to replace it by the lamb burger, right? So we are going to change the product according to requirement of the nature. If you just think about the Netflix, right? So if you just think about the Indian Netflix, so they are, I mean, program sequence is totally different from the normal Netflix. Multi-domestic strategy. So you're changing your product according to the market that you deal with. So this is also a kind of a corporate level strategy. Make a develop corporate level strategies because that impact towards the entire business. So, and now we're going to talk about the business level strategy. Again, business level එකේදී අපි කතා කරන ඒවා. So whether you're going to have a low cost strategy, whether you're going to have a differentiation strategy or a focus strategy, so it's a business level strategy. We call this as the Porter's generic strategy කියලා අපි මේවට කියනවා. Michael Porter තමයි ගිහි දීලා තියෙන්නේ. මේකට කියනවා Porterගේ generic strategies කියලා. Low cost කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි so the market එකේ අපි කියනවා මට වඩා අඩුවෙන් වෙන කාටවත් දෙන්න බෑ. So that is what we call as the low cost strategy. So you know when it comes to the market, so the people know, so if you need to buy the lowest price product, so you have to go with this particular brand. So that is known as a low cost strategy. So how can you have the low cost strategy? So that is through the economies of scale. So when you produce more and more products, so that එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ unit cost එක අඩු වෙනවා unit cost එක අඩු වෙනකොට අඩු ගන්නට දෙන්න පුළුවන්. So this is what we call as the low cost strategy. And the next thing is the differentiation. So rather than the cost, you are thinking about the customizing a product, right? So you are trying to differentiate product. Product එකක් differentiate කරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ හැමතිස්සෙම ඒකට ඔයාට cost එකක් යනවා. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට බෝඩිස්ටි ගත්තොත් ඊළඟට hard rock cafe වගේ මම දන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ අහලා තියෙනවා කියලා hard rock cafe. It's a very famous restaurant channel, Hard Rock Cafe. So rather than a normal cafe, so that they have a hard rock culture there. So it's differentiated, right? So when we're talking about the differentiation, that's always have to bear with the extra cost differentiation. So people buying your product because you have special characteristics. So if you just think about iPhone, if you just think about Mercedes-Benz, so that they have differentiated. So the next thing is the focus. පුංචි කැලකට niche market එකට low cost කරනවා. Niche market එකකට differentiate කරනවා. So these are known as the business level strategies. So you have to do that within the process, right? So that's why we call them as the business level strategies. So these are the low cost and the differentiation. Sometimes people or the organization that they try to differentiate their product as well as they try to go with a low cost strategy too. It's difficult to do because when you're differentiating, so that means you have to bear a cost. So you cannot focus on differentiation while being in the while using the low cost strategies. So if you try to do that, we call it as the stuck in the middle, right? So it is difficult to simultaneously become differentiated than low cost. It's difficult, right? And this is what we call as a focus low cost or focus differentiated. So that means you're going to have a low cost strategy for a focus, for niche markets. So you try to serve one segment of the market, but be the lowest cost in the segment, right? Focus differentiated. Can differentiate karna focus group thing. So that's there. And also we have the functional level strategies. Then අපි කතා කරා ඉස්සෙල්ලාම examples for the corporate level strategies as well as the business level strategies. And now we are going to talk about the functional level strategies. So that means at the functional level. So whatever the functional goals are there. So in order to achieve, then අපි හිතමු sales target එකක් දීලා තිනවා, marketing target එකක්, production target එකක්. ඒව කරන්නේ කොහොමද? What are the strategies that you can use to achieve these functional goals? Right? So that's known as the functional strategies. So normally you try to reduce your operational cost by providing the value in the product. So you add new values to the products by differentiating. So these are known as the functional strategies. So with that, we have come to the end of planning chapter. So these are the model or the mock questions, right? So here I'm asking, what is the mission statement of an organization? It's an inspirational description. It's a short-term plan. The plan for the existence, the plan for the immediate term. No, so the C is the correct one for short. I mean, when it comes to the mission, it's not an inspirational one. It's inspirational, but it has a scope, right? It's not something like a vision. It's not a short-term one. It is a long-term one. And also it's not for the immediate term, right? So it takes time to achieve it. So therefore, that's the reason for the existence, plans for the existence. So the scenario planning, in a sense, you have scenarios in future, right? So it's not a narrow view and limited scope. No, it's not. It's derivative of the operational plan. No, it's focused on only 1 year. No, it generates several forecasts of different futures, of course, and how to respond to them. So this is what we call as scenario planning. So the fourth one. So in SWOT analysis, what happens? So you convert the weaknesses into strength. Of course, you are converting the weaknesses into strength. And then you are matching the threats into the opportunities in a way. You are matching what? You are matching the strength into the opportunities. So this is what happens. So the fourth one is the correct answer. So these are the questions where I'm asking you to define the term planning. So what does it mean by planning? What are the 3 stages of the planning? And also I'm asking you to describe the related diversification and unrelated diversification. So you should be able to do it. And also I'm asking you to check some of the mission statement of some of the organization and check the characteristics. So these are the examples, AT&T as well as the Compaq. So you just go home and check whatever once we have go home anyway, once we have finished the lesson. So you just go through some of the mission as well as the objectives, values of the organizations, and check whether you whether you are capable or competent enough to identify the characteristics of the mission statements. For an example, our university mission, mission of the Unilever, Procter and Gamble, as well as Coca-Cola, Walt Disney, some of the special, if you just think about iPhone, Apple, right? So just check their missions and check whether you are able to understand, identify whatever the characteristics of the mission. Okay. So with that, we have come to the end of that particular chapter. So I'm going to give you a small break. It's a bit difficult for me to speak continuously. So we'll be starting again at 11:15. Yeah, 11:15.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, we'll start the lecture number. So the second one, when it comes to the management, we said that there are 4 basic managerial functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So we have talked about the planning, and now we are going to talk about the organizing. So what does it mean by organizing? Why it is important to have the organizing and organization? So just before we start the organizing lesson, so let me tell you a kind of a very nice case study. So this was happened a long time ago, like when the Renault and the Nissan was trying to merge their companies, right? So that at the initial start, the Renault and Nissan had just agreed to an important strategic alliance. So at that time, Renault CEO, he had an issue because Nissan was like they were close to bankruptcy, right? So that they didn't perform well at that time. So that Nissan was in a kind of a risk of uh, 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 I mean, a bankrupt. And therefore, what the CEO's task at that time, Renault CEO's task was to turn around Japan's Nissan into a profitable company. So, in order to do that, he hired a particular person, which is known as a turnaround artist. Turnaround artist කියලා කියන්නේ bankrupt වෙන්න යන company එකක්, perform කරන්න නැති company එකක් perform කරන්න පුළුවන් විදිහට convert කරන්න පුළුවන් හොඳ strategic manager කෙනෙක්ව hire කරන්න පුළුවන්. We call them as a turnaround artist. So they are paid really well. So there was a person who called the Gozen, so that he hired this particular person in order to convert Nissan into a profitable business. But Nissan, that they had a whole different story, right? So one thriving company that they have been struggling to turn a profit for 8 years, and they were purchasing and manufacturing. When it comes to them, that their purchasing and manufacturing costs were high and profit margin was very low, notoriously low. The company's debt, even after the Renault investment, so that was huge, right? So the product innovation was at standstill, and the company was trying to compete with aging and outdated car models. So when Gosen go to Nissan, he found a kind of a deeper problem, including their culture of blaming, right? So that they used to blame each other. There was no one who were willing to accept the responsibility for the mistakes. So one reason that he discovered was that most Nissan managers that they did not have clearly defined areas of responsibility as well as authority. And also the another one is the lack of trust, communication, and collaboration across the department. Right? So when something went wrong, right? So what happened? So each and everyone started to blame. Sales blame the product planning blame the engineering blame the sales blame the finance, and so on. Right? So nothing ever got solved. So the Gosen knew he was facing two do or die situation. So he thought, right, in order to do that, what we can do, so we have to change the entire organizational structure of the Nissan. So Nissan, what Gosen did, so he changed the organizational structure, the structural design, largely changed it, and then he said that he used the elements of the structure to define the authority and the responsibility for the managers, and he promoted the accountability, and he improved the coordination so that Nissan can bring out new products and regain a kind of a competitive edge that they have lost in the history. Right. So then thereafter, so they goes and converted Nissan into a profitable company. So Renault merged a kind of an had an alliance with the Nissan. So that became a kind of a most profitable alliance in the history. One of the most profitable alliances in the history. Right. So this is why I'm telling about this particular case, because you should understand the importance of organization structure. Why it is important to have an organization structure, because when it comes to an organization, so if you don't have a particular organization structure, then you don't know whose authority, whose responsibility, so there will be a blaming structure, so everything will go wrong. So sometimes you might have a good plan, but when you don't allocate people in a proper manner, so then everything might go in a wrong way. So this is why it is important to have an organizational structure. So when we're talking about the organizational structure, so that means you should have a kind of a structure in order to explain who report to whom, what is the responsibility of that particular person, and also how do you allocate the resources within an organization. So that's something you have to understand. So organizing is that the way that you allocate the organizational resources in order to achieve the organizational goals within your organization. So this is the process where the managers that they create the relationship among the employees as well as across the departments. and then you're trying to achieve the goals. So most importantly, you allocate the resources within organization. Right. So the organizational structure is a kind of a tool that the manager use in order to improve this relationship as well as allocate these resources. May resources allocate කරන්නයි, coordinate කරන්නයි, communicate කරන්නයි පාවිච්චි කරන tool එකට අපි කියන්නේ organizational structure එක කියන්නේ. So when we're talking about the organizing process, so that leads to creation of the organizational structure. So when it comes to the organizational structure, so it defines how the particular task is divided and how the resources are allocated within the organization. So when we're talking about the organizational structure, so that there are normal formal tasks that is assigned to the individuals and department, and also it describes the reporting relationship. It includes the line of hierarchy, authority, who reports to whom, the decision responsibility, number of hierarchical level, and also the span of manager's control. I mean, when it comes to a particular manager, the number of employees report to a particular manager. So we call it as the span of manager's control. And the design of the system so ensures the effective coordination of employees across the department. So this is what we call as organizational structure or organizational design. Right. So when it comes to a successful organization, so we try to design organizations so they always try to have a design that depends on the organization's unique situation. So when it comes to a structure, for some organizations that they might have a different structure, so that is based on their requirement. So the organization structure might be different based on these characteristics. Making a characteristics hinda එක organization structure එකක් අනිත් structure එකකින් වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So these are the determinants that describe whatever the factors that determine the organization structure of your particular organization. So the first one is the environment. So the environment that you deal with. So suppose that the environment in your organization, that if you are in a kind of a turbulent environment, that rapidly need to respond to the environment. Taken up the finance industry environment so you have to rapidly respond to these changes. And also if you just think about the IT industry, so it's rapidly changing, right? The technology, right? So you have to rapidly respond to this environmental changes. In that case, you have to have a kind of a very flexible organizational structure where you can respond to your customers easily, right? So that's one particular factor that impact towards the organizational structure, environment, right? So, but if you have a kind of a rigid environment, so where the impact influence towards the organization is not that particular, then you might have a kind of a rigid structure where you have a centralized authority. And also when we're talking about the technology, in some cases you might have kind of improved technology which is needed much train and all sort of skills. So then you have to have a kind of a flexible structure where you have skillful people within your organization. And also when you have something like procedures, technology එකක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන් සමහර වෙලාවට අර දිගින් දිගටම එකම රැපිඩ් process එකක් යන. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා මේකට දාන්න තියෙන්නේ බටන් එකක් on කරන්න තියෙන්නේ mechanized machine වලින් යන්නේ. So then that case you don't need to have many flexible structures. In that case you can have a kind of a rigid structure. So on the other hand, the human resource. So when you have skillful human, so then you can give them the authority. So you can give them a flexible structure. You can have a flexible structure. But on the other hand, when you deal with people who are not that skillful, but still you have to monitor them, right? So then that case, you have to have a kind of a rigid structure. And also the strategies that you use, whether you are having a differentiation strategy or the cost leadership or business strategies, in use differentiation, so you should have a kind of a flexible structure because you have to do the customization according to the different requirement of the customer. But on the other hand, so if you try to have the cost leadership by saving the cost, by reducing the waste, so then you can have the procedures. So then you can have a rigid structure where you have number of different hierarchical levels. So these are the determinants. So these are the factors that determine the design or the organizational structure. That means whether you are going to have a flexible structure or a kind of a rigid structure. Right, so the flexible structure එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ ගොඩක් වෙලාවට flat structure එකක්, right? So flat structure එකක් in a sense that you might have a kind of okay, what issue got there? So you might have a flat structure in a sense that if you just think about the organizational structure, sometimes you might have this kind of structure where you have number of people that who reports to a one particular manager. But in here, you might have number of levels. right? මේකෙදි ගත්තාම මොකද වෙන්නේ levels ගාන වැඩි. හරිද? මේක ගත්තාම levels ගාන අඩුයි. හැබැයි එක level එක ඉන්න කට්ටිය ගාන වැඩි. delegates ගාන වැඩි. Right? So we call this kind of a structure as a flat structure where you have less number of hierarchical level, but when it comes to the number of people who report to one particular manager is high, span of manager is really high. But when it comes to a tall structure, what happens? So then you have the different levels, but here the span is low. When you talk about this, we call it's decentralizing, where you are giving authority or power, responsibility to delegating to number of people. But in here, it's centralized. We call it centralization. So normally for this type of a structure as a flexible structure, and this kind of a structure as a rigid structure, the tall structure, right? Tall structure. So this is what we have described, right? So when we're talking about the organizational structures, right? So organizing structure and organizational design. And also we said that these factors, so the environment, technology, human resource, and the strategy, so that decide whether you're going to have a tall structure or a flat structure. So the flat structure, in a sense, a kind of a flexible structure, tall structure, in a sense, kind of a centralized or a kind of a rigid structure. Right. So these are the factors that we have described. So how the environmental factors as well as the strategies might impact towards the structure. So as I said you before, the environment. So when you're talking about the environmental changes, when you have a turbulent environment that's changing rapidly, so the managers that they have to have, they might have more problems because that they have to rapidly change to the environmental changes. So the structure must be more flexible when the environmental changes are rapid. Right. So this is why you have to have a decentralized authority. So that means a kind of a flat structure. Right? And on the other hand, you have the strategies, whether you have differentiation strategy or the cost focus strategy. So based on that, you have to change your organizational structure. So if you have a differentiation strategy, then you have to have a flexible structure, a flat structure. And also when you're having a low cost, you might need a kind of a formal structure. So the technology, so whatever the technology that you use, whether you have a task variety or task analyzability, so that means whether you are having a high task or the low task, right? So whether you are having a high task variety and the low task variety, whatever the technology that you use, so that also impact towards your organization structure. And then the human resources, whether you are having a high skilled workers or the high skill or the low skilled workers, so then how you should given the flexibility. So then when you're having a high skilled workers, normally you can give more flexibility. So then you can give a kind of a flexible structure. But when you are having a low skilled workers where you need to have where they need to be closely monitored, then in that case you can have a more formal structure. So this is how the factors might impact towards your organizational structures. So as I said you before, so those are the structures that might impact towards your businesses. So when you're having your organizational structure, so you have to understand the centralization and decentralization concept. So the centralization means that the decision or the authority is located near the top of the organization. So it is on top. Right? When it comes to the decentralization, so the decision authority is normally pushed down the lower organizational levels. So the organizations that they have different hierarchical levels where you have delegating authority to your employees, right? So when we're talking about the organizational structures, then Arman kiwa based on all these criteria, so based on the type of the products and services that you deal with, as well as the nature of your organization, that you might have different type of organizational structures. So now we are going to describe about those organizational structures that is based on their characteristics. So the first one is the functional structure. So when we're talking about the functional structures, ළමයි functional structure එක කියලා කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම organizational structure, you can divide it into departments. Departments, please don't write on the screen, right? So when we're talking about the organizational structure, so that means you can make the organizational structure so that is based on the departments. So you can create the departments, right? Department so based on based on some criteria, you can create organization into small subunit. We call them as the autonomous subunits, a kind of a unit that has all the resources and decision making power that is required to run its operations daily. So we call them as a subunit. So in this case, it's a function, right? For an example, you might have seen in your organization that you have different departments based on the functions that they do, right? For the marketing, you have a marketing department. For the finance, you have the finance department. So that is based on the function. We can, when the mayor organization like a structure, so that is based on the function. So you are dividing into the departments or the subunits based on the function. So we call them as a functional structures, right? Functional structure. So that is one type of an organization. So in here, this particular department, functional department, finance department, marketing department, operational department, logistic department, so they work as a subunit. autonomous subunit එකක්. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඕන කරන resources ඔක්කොම ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඇතුළෙම තියෙනවා. power එක තියෙනවා to make the decision. So this is why we call as a functional structure. So here what you are trying to do, you are trying to group the position into the department based on their skills, similar skills, expertise, work activities as well as resources that they use. So the functional structure එක ගත්තහම, so this structure can be thought of as a departmentalization, as I said you before, because each type of functional activities, so like accounting, human resource, engineering, manufacturing, so they represent specific resources for performing the organizational task. So this is what we call as a functional structure. And the next thing is the divisional structure. So the divisional structure, in a sense that in contrast to the functional approach, here what happens, so the people are grouped by a common skill and resources that is known as a divisional structure. So you have the departments that are grouped together based on the organizational output. So that can be a product structure, that can be a geographic structure, or that can be a market structure. So Alfred Sloan is the person, he was the long-time CEO of General Motors. He was the first person to introduce this particular divisional approach, right? Bill Gates review Bill Gates has described this as the most important management book ever written because of this importance, right? So he says that he also used that in Microsoft, and also he said that most of the organizations, once they use this, that they can increase the production efficiency within an organization. So if you just think about the Microsoft business, that they have divisions, that they have Windows divisions, that they have server and tools, they have online service divisions, that they have Microsoft Business, they have entertainment devices. So this is how that they have their own divisions, that when the huge organizations that they produce products for different markets, so they can use this divisional structure that works because each division is a kind of an autonomous business unit, right? So as I said you before, when it comes to the Microsoft businesses, that they have Windows division where they have operating systems as well as related software and online services. And also for the service and tools, that they have their service softwares, their software developers, their tools, and their cloud-based services, solutions, all these stuff. For the online service decisions, that they have their Bing, MSN, right? And then when it comes to the Microsoft businesses, that they have their Office 365, that their SharePoint. And for the entertainment and devices, that they have Xbox and they have Skype, all these stuff. So this is how it works. So each unit is headed by a president who is accountable for the performance of that particular decision. And they contain these functions, right? So that they have their own product development, sales, marketing, and finance people, right? So when we're talking about the the Microsoft, that they're facing the new competitive threats from the Googles and the makers like the pre-Linux operating system. So the top executives that they have initiated restructuring to help the Microsoft to be more flexible to the market. So this is why they have these kind of product structures. So the product structures. So the divisions created according to the type of the product or services that they produce. And on the other hand, that you can have the structure. So here the department or the autonomous subunit would be a geography. So based on the geography. So here what happens? You make the divisional responsibility to the group of the company activities by geographic region or the customer group. Now, here first we will be talking about it based on the geography and then based on the customer. So that is market structure, right? So if you just think about this particular structure, so all the function in a specific country or a specific region report to some division manager. For an example, if you just think about the Unilever, that they have Unilever Hindustan and the next one. So here that Unilever Hindustan, so that report to a different manager, right? So this is there. So based on the geography, so the Starbucks, so they have America, they have different units in America, Europe, and China and Asia Pacific. So this is how it works. For the Coca-Cola also same, right? So this is something. So the structure focuses companies' activities on local market conditions as well as the different regions. Right? So the competitive advantage might come from the production or the sales, so the products or the services that because they are in a particular region, they have localized, that they have customized to that particular region. So this is what we call as the geographic structure. And on the other, this is a kind of an example for the product structure. So as we have described, so here you can see CEO is on top and the corporate managers are there. So based on the product that you have divided, washing machine, lighting division, television division. So as I said, for the Microsoft, so you have the Windows division, server and tools one section, online service decision, Microsoft businesses, entertainment and devices. So these are the divisions. If you just think about the Unilever ඇවිල්ලා hybrid එකක් ඇත්තම. මේ තියෙන මේ විදිහට geographic එකක් ගත්තොත් Unilever Hindustan ඊට පස්සේ වෙන එක කියලා පටන් ගන්නවා. ඒකනේ දෙක බෙදෙන්නේ geography එක විදිහට. In here you can see the north region, west region, southern region, eastern region කියලා යනවා. ඒ වගේ so you divide based on the region, and then when it comes to the Unilever you have a product. හරිද? එතකොට ඊට ආපස්සේ තියෙනවා ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ household ඊළඟට personal care ඊට පස්සේ Unilever Pureit and another one, food and beverages. So these are four categories, four divisions that they have based on the product. Right, so it's a kind of combination of the product and geography structure, right? So this is what we call the product structure. So you are having the departments based on the product, and then you are having the structures, the departments based on the regions, and then you have the structures based on customers that you deal with, your market. So sometimes you have a business customers, small business customers, educational institution, individual customers. For an example, if you just think about a commercial bank, that they have these kind of structure for the business customers, for the local customers, government customers, educational institutions. So you have different divisions. So this is what we call as the market structure, right? So then apart from the structures, there is a special type of structure which is known as a matrix structure. This is a kind of a complex structure. It's a combination of two types of structures. A combination, right? So when we're talking about the matrix structure, one second. The matrix structure is a kind of a blend. So that means it's a kind of a combination of two types of structures, right? So when we're talking about the matrix structure, so that you have a kind of functional, and both functional and divisional structures are simultaneously there in that particular structure. Function structure divisional structure එක කියලා කියන්නේ එක්ක geography එක එක්ක market structure එක එක්ක product structure එක ඔය තුනෙන් එකක් එක්ක functional structure එක combine වෙලා තියෙනවා නම් අපි ඒකට කියනවා matrix structure එකක් කියලා. So let's go to the structure and then see then you can realize what is it. So when we're talking about the matrix structure, so this is a kind of an example for the matrix structure. So you can see here, you have the divisional structure that is based on the product. Maybe product A, product B, product B, C. So this is, you have made the division based on the product. Method of functional structure, sales, design, production. So it's a combination. So you can see it's a combination of both structures, that is the product structure as well as the functional structure. Here, instead of the product, you might have the geography or market structures too. Right, so it's a combination of functional as well as the divisional structures. So what happens to a person in this particular structure? So they have two bosses, right? So you can see he has one boss from the product team as well as another boss from the design team. So you report to two type of bosses, two boss employees are there. So there is a two-way information. So when we're talking about the matrix structure, so it's very flexible and can respond rapidly to the changes in organization. So each employee has two bosses, which can sometimes cause problems because you have to report to two of them, right? So two types of two-way reporting system is there. So this is what we call as a matrix structure. Apart from the matrix structure, so now we are going to talk about the hybrid structure. So as I said you before for the Unilever, so it's a kind of a hybrid structure where you have combination of the structures. So if you just think about most of the organizations in today's world, so rather than rely on a one particular structure, that they combine the characteristics of some structures. So we call them as the hybrid structures. Many large organizations that they have divisional structure where each manager can select the best structure for the particular division, as well as that they have the combination of these functional as well as the geographical, the other structural characteristics. So why it is important to have an organizational structure? So if you can just think about the case that we have discussed so far, right? So whatever, I mean, when it comes to this Nissan and Renault case study, so how the Nissan turned into a profitable company. So you can understand why it is important to have the organizational structure. So basically that is the coordinating functions, right? So you have to coordinate, you have to tell how to create the relationship, how to allocate the resources. So these are the main stuff, right? So the first thing is the authority. So you have to think about the power. So you said the power of hierarchy. So the power of authority. So you said the hierarchy of authority. You say that who report to whom. So the power vested in the manager to make the decision and resources. It's described within the organizational structure, hierarchy of authority. And then the span of control. So it describes the number of workers that report to a one particular manager. Right, so if you just think about these stuffs that you can recall whatever the things that we have studied in Henry Fayol's, right? So span of control, unity of command, unity of direction, right? Then the line authority. So the managers in a direct chain of the command so that they produce the goods and services, right? So if we just think about the sales manager, so that it's a line authority. And the staff authority. So the managers in a particular position that they gives advisors to the line managers. For an example, a legal manager, so that they have to give legal advices to the managers in different positions. So that's the staff authority. So when we're talking about the organizational structure, so as I said you before, that basically you can divide the organizational structures into two types, like tall structures and the flat structures. So the tall structures, in a sense that you have different levels as we have described here. So here you can see that there are different level of there are different hierarchical levels in a tall structure, and also it's centralized. The power is more, authority is more centralized. But when it comes to the flat structure, so that is total opposites, where you are delegating into number of people. So you have less number of levels, but if you just think about the span of control, so that means the number of people who report to one particular manager is high in flat structures rather than the tall structures. So these are the characteristics of the tall and flat structures. And also we have discussed about the centralized versus decentralizing, centralizing in a sense that the power centralized into a one particular person. So if you just think about the tall structure where you have centralization and decentralization in the flat structures. So with that, we have come to the organizing end of the organizing and organizational structures. So here you can see some of the questions. So here I'm asking the job enlargement. So what does it mean by the job enlargement? So the enlarging means a sense, so you are increasing the job, the task, not enriching. Enriching in a sense, you are increasing the responsibilities. So job enlargement in a sense, you increase the task for given job to reduce the boredom. So when you are doing the same task again and again, sometimes people might get bored. So in order to reduce that, sometimes you have to increase the task. So we call it as the job enlargement. So the B increase the task for given job to reduce the burden. Increase the degree of the responsibility in a sense, job enrichment, right? So that is there. And then the span of control. So the span of control in a sense, the number of employees report to one particular manager, right? So that is there. So that is C, the number of workers a manager can effectively manage, right? So that's there. And 1 second. Okay. So that's what we call as the job span of control. So the number of workers managers can effectively manage. And then, yeah. So here I'm asking you to select the incorrect statement. So in the market structures. So if you just think about the market structures, right? So that result in complex net, what the market structures, metric structures, right? So if you just think about the metric structures, so that result in a complex network corresponding relationship. So the second one is very flexible and respond to the rapidly to changing environment. Here I'm asking to select the incorrect one. Okay, results in a complex network. Of course, it's complex because you have two bosses, and it's very flexible because you can rapidly respond to the changing environment. Each employee, of course, has two bosses, which can cause problems. No two-way reporting is wrong. There is two-way reporting here because you have to report to two people. So the two-way reporting is there. So the D is the incorrect statement. And here I'm asking you to state and describe the 4 factors that is affect the organization design. So if you can remember, we have discussed 4 factors, that is the human resource, strategy, environment, as well as the technology that might impact towards the your organizational structure and the design. Here I'm asking you to differentiate between the centralized and decentralized operations. So you should be able to do that. And I'm asking you to describe the matrix organization structure by using a diagram. So you can draw a diagram in order to show that it's a combination of the functional structure as well as a divisional structure. So you have to draw and show it. And also here you can differentiate between the tall and flat structures. So what are the characteristics of the tall and flat structures? So this is your home assignment, right? So how do you feel about having a manager's responsibility in today's world? Characterized by an uncertainty and ambiguity and sudden changes or threats from the environment, right? So you have to describe the roles and some skills and competencies that are important for the managers under these conditions, right? So you have to describe about how these things happen, right? Okay. මම එක දැන් ඉවර වෙනවා කොහොමද ස්ක්‍රීන් එකේ අයින් වෙනවා. So that will be there. So just about that. Okay. So with that, we have come to the end of the organizing functions too. So let's go to the next function. So that is leading and controlling. So let's go to the leading function. So when it comes to the leading lamai, so it's a kind of a little bit complicated one, right? At a plan එකක් තිබ්බ or organization structure එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒ කියලා organizational goals achieve කරයිද මිනිස්සු? No, it won't happen. So you have to lead people. You have to influence people in order to achieve the organizational task. So this is really complicated and the most difficult task. So how can you do that? So just because of the complexity of this particular function, we have divided this function into three different chapters like leadership, motivation, group, and team. So let's talk about the first one. So we'll talk about the motivation, leadership, and then the group and teams. Right. So let me open the. So let's talk about the motivation. So as I said you before, just because of the complexity, this leading function will be divided into three chapters like motivation, leadership, group, and teams. So when we're talking about the motivation, so please remember, so you will be having your quiz on Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember exactly the date that I have fixed. Please check. That's as I can remember, it's on Tuesday from 8 to 12 or something like that. I'll let you know through the batch rep. And so you will be getting the quiz that is up to the things that we have studied so far until the organizing, right? So you will be getting the quiz from organizing and uh, planning, uh, introduction, as well as the organization environments, right? So then, so please go through those four chapters to get ready with the quiz, right? And now we are going to talk about the motivation. So when we're talking about the motivation, so if you just think about the person, right? So when we're talking about people, so people get up in early morning and you go to work. So most of us, right? So we get up in the morning, we go to university or we go to school. Sometimes small people, and sometimes if you just think about ourselves, we go to work and we behave in a way that our own way, right? So we work as we want, so we respond to our environment and the people that we work within, right? So with little thoughts. So whether we work hard or not, so that depends on the environment that we deal with as well as the people that we deal with, right? So if you just think about myself, I enjoy some classes rather than the other classes. I mean, if you just think about, there are some sort of classes that I really like. I have some questions, and when the classes are more interactive, right? So that's there. So it seems more fun for us, right? So rather than having this kind of class there I do not talk to much my students, right? So that's there. So when it comes to the people, that all these behaviors are motivated by something. So the motivation, in a sense, that it's a kind of an influence, it's a kind of a force that might come within you, or a kind of an external person, right? So that enthusiasm, persistence to achieve a particular kind of a goal. So we call it as the motivation. So if you just think about the employee motivation, so that will definitely impact towards the productivity. So it's the part of manager's job, right? So as a manager, that you have to motivate your employees in order to achieve the organizational goals, right? So this has to be done, right? So we, yeah, so this is why it is important to have motivation, right? So when we're talking about the motivation, so as we have described the motivation, so you can describe the motivation by using a small kind of an equation. So we'll talk about the equation a little later. So when we're talking about the motivation, so initially you should understand, so it's a kind of an influence, right? So people that they have basic needs, that they have basic requirements. So you have to fulfill these requirements in order to motivate people, right? So මිනිස්සුන්ව motivate කරන්න පුළුවන් විදිහ තමයි rewards ගත්තහම ඒ කියන්නේ මොන හරි tangible දෙයක් දෙනවා කියන එකම නෙමෙයි. හරිද? Reward can be two types, right? So when we're talking about the reward, so that might be a kind of an intrinsic award, or that might be a kind of an extrinsic award. Intrinsic rewards are satisfaction a person receives within the process of performing a particular action. සමහර වෙලාවට ඔයා මොකක් හරි ටාස්ක් එකක් කම්ප්ලීට් කරාම ඔයාට තමන් ගැන සතුටක් එනවා නම්, so that is a kind of an intrinsic reward, intrinsic motivation. So that is the behavior performed for its own sake. So motivation here comes from a particular person by completing a particular task. Extrinsic motivation කියලා කියන්නේ, so that is from a particular person, right? So particular when it comes to a particular person, that again, when an external party hacking එනවා නම් අපි ඒකට කියනවා extrinsic motivation එකක් කියලා. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට intrinsic කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි teacher කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා, right? So he sells the education materials for intrinsic reward, that he is trying to help the children read well, right? So this is his task, right? So that's known as intrinsic motivation. Please don't write on the screen. Don't use the screen, right? So it's known as the intrinsic motivation. And the next thing is the extrinsic motivation. So the extrinsic motivation, in a sense, that you always try to give something externally, right? May external reward, it can be monetary or not something monetary. Can එක්කෝ සැලරි එක වැඩි කරා වෙන්න පුළුවන්, එක්කෝ බෝනස් එකක් දෙන්නවා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැතු සැලරි බෝනස් නැතුව, so sometimes you might give a kind of a vacation, sometimes you might give a kind of a appreciation. So that's also a kind of an extrinsic award. Extrinsic award එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ, so that is given by another person, so normally a manager, so that which means like a promotion, a kind of a payment increments, right? So some kind of a bonus, right? So that is there. So when we're talking about the extrinsic rewards, right? So you know that extrinsic rewards are important. People do not work if they don't get a kind of a good salary or bonus. So that is really important. But extrinsic rewards ගත්තහම හොඳ manager කෙනෙක් ගත්තොත්, that they always try to help people to achieve intrinsic awards as well, rewards. Extrinsic rewards වගේම intrinsic rewards ගැන හිතන්න ඕනේ. If you just think about the Google, right? People are motivated there by the task. So when you're having the complicated task, so by completing the task also you get motivated, right? So this is something really important to understand, right? So because when it comes to the extrinsic reward, so if you heavily think about the extrinsic of reward, so that won't be sustainable. So you have to think about both intrinsic as well as extrinsic rewards in order to balance the management, right? So here we will be talking about equation. So when we talking about the motivation ළමයි motivation equation කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. Motivation equation එක කියලා කියන්නේ, so when we talking about the motivation, so you know that you get the inputs in organization, you process it and you get the output. So when it comes to the motivation, so what are the inputs that you get from your employees? Employees ලගෙන් හම්බෙන inputs මොනවාද ඔයාට? Employee ගෙන් හම්බෙන inputs ටික වෙන්නේ ළමයි. So you get the skills, their experience, their time, their knowledge. So these are the inputs that you are getting from your employees. So you use them in your organization in order to produce products and services, right? So once you have done it, now you have to give an outcome, right? So what is the outcome that you give to your employees? මේ return ටික අරගත්තට පස්සේ employee ට දෙන outcome එක මොනවාද? Outcome එක තමයි එක්ක එයාට payment increment එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන්, එක්ක එයාට bonus එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන්, vacation එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන්. So this is the outcome that they get. So that might be an intrinsic reward or an extrinsic reward. Right? So this is what we call as the motivation equation. So you get the inputs from your employees and you process it in order to achieve your organizational goals in an efficient and effective manner. So then right after, upon achieving your organizational goals, that you have to give something in return to your employees. So you give intrinsic or extrinsic rewards, right? So that means sometimes that they might satisfied by themselves. So that's also an outcome. Sometimes you guys might give them a monetary reward. So that's like a payment or a kind of a bonus or a kind of an allowance, right? Sometimes you might give a kind of an appreciation, right? So which is not a money, which has no monetary value. So that's known as the outcome. So this is what we call the outcome and input. Outcome කියලා කියන්නේ anything the person gets from the job. Input in a sense, anything person contribute to their job. So what are the outcomes? So the examples are like payments, bonus, autonomy, whatever the accomplishment, satisfaction that you feel, appreciation. Inputs are the skills, the knowledge, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, behaviors that you put, your time, experience that you put in your organization, your inputs, right? So now we are going to talk about the expectance theory. So when it comes to the motivation, Lamai, so there are certain theories that you should know. Here we will be talking about these theories, right? So first we'll be talking about the expectancy theory, and then we'll be talking about the motivation theory. So when we're talking about the expectancy theory, so what does it mean by the expectancy? So expectancy කියලා කියන්නේ අපි කතා කරන්නේ expectation එක. Expectancy කියලා කියන්නේ. So the expectancy theory කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයි, so when we're talking about the individuals, that they have some expectation about their ability to perform a particular task. ඒ කියන්නේ සමහර වෙලාවට අපි හිතනවානේ මම මොනවා කරත් මට මේ පේපර් එකට ඒකක් හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ ලෙක්චරර් ලකුණු දෙන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට ඔයා වැඩ කරනවද? කරන්නේ නැහැනේ. එයා හිතනවා කොච්චර කොහොම වැඩ කරත් එයා ඒකක් දෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ හින්දා මම වැඩ කරන්නේ. So your effort, so you have an idea. So first you analyze whether your contribution might impact towards the outcome. If not, then you won't put an effort. So this is what first we call as the expectancy. Expectancy theory එකේ අපි කතා කරනවා. We will be talking about three areas. We will be talking about the expectancy, instrumentality, and the valence. First thing is the expectancy. So the expectancy in a sense that you think that when we're talking about your effort, your input, so that means your knowledge, your skills, attitudes, your behavior, your time. So that might impact towards the achieving organizational tasks. If not, you won't put your effort. So that's known as the expectancy. So you will work hard if it lead to high performance. හොඳට ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා හිතුවොත් වැඩ කරන තරමට තමයි performance වැඩි වෙන්නේ කියලා ඔයා වැඩ කරනවා. හැබැයි ඔයා හිතුවොත් කොච්චර වැඩ කරත් performance එන්නේ නැහැ කියලා ඔයා වැඩ කරන්නේ නැහැ. So that's known as the expectancy. So the next thing is the instrumentality. So that means your performance lead to outcome. ඔයා හිතනවා හරි organization එක goal එක achieve කරා කියන්නකො. ඒ achieve කරොත් මගේ salary එකට කිසිම වෙනසක් වෙන්නේ නැත්නම් මට වැඩක් තියනවද organization එකේ goal achieve කරන්න නෑ කියලා. නෑ. මොකද මට salary එක කොහොමද හම්බෙනවා. ඒ task එක කරා නැතත්. So you don't need to achieve that organizational performance then. So you will not work hard if you, I mean, තමන්ගේ මේ performance එකෙන් තමන්ට outcome එකක් හම්බෙන්නේ නැත්නම් ඔයා ඒ performance එක ගන්න මහන්සි වෙන්නේ නැහැ. So ultimately you won't work hard. So that's known as the instrumentality. So that means your performance lead to the outcomes. Workers that they only motivated if they know that their performance will give you a good outcome, right? So the managers that they always have to link outcome with the performance. ඒ කියන්නේ හැමතිස්සෙම යාලා task එක complete කරොත් මොකක් හරි හම්බ වෙනවා කියන එක පෙන්වන්නම ඕනේ. කියන්නේ මේක කරොත් තමයි bonus එක හම්බ වෙන්නේ. So it is always linked. Then only they get motivated. So we call it as the instrumentality. And the next thing is the valence. So the valence in a sense, so when they said that, okay, you get a salary increment, just 5% or 5%. So is it something enough for you? So you feel like, okay, මෙච්චර වැඩ කරලා 5% ගන්නට වඩා හොඳයි නොගෙන ඉන්නවා. So the valence in a sense, how desirable each outcome is to a particular person. Right? So when it comes to a particular person, so you have to understand how important this increment for me. So this is what we call as the expectancy theory. So where you have the expectancy, instrumentality as well as the valence. So the expectancy in the sense that your expectation that your effort will lead to high performance. So you work hard because if you work hard, you get good performance. Then in a sense, so your performance has a link to the outcome. So you get more when you perform more. And the valence in a sense, your outcome is something that is desired. So the rewards that you get is something really matters to you. Right? So that's what we call as valence. Right? So when we're talking about the high motivation, so according to the expectancy theory, high motivation results from high level of expectancy, high level of instrumentality, as well as high levels of valence, right? So that's what you have to understand. And the next thing is the need theory. So when we're talking about your people, if you just think about your organization, so if you just think about employees within your organization, that they have needs, reality needs, you know. So you have tried to motivate your people through fulfilling their needs. අපි හැමතිස්සෙම හදනවා මිනිස්සුන්ව motivate කරන්න ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ requirements දීලා, needs දීලා. So this is what we call as a need theory. So need means the requirements for their survival. So you can motivate a person by understanding whatever the needs that the workers have at that particular moment and satisfying them. So you might have watched Kurbio කියලා program එකක් තිබෙනවා, TV drama එකක්. ඒකේ හදන software එකක්. එයා කියන්නේ employees ලගේ requirement ටික අඳුරගන්න software එකක්. ඔයාගේ employee ගේ details ටික දැම්මම ඔයා දන්නවා මේ වෙලාවේදී යාට මොනවද ඕනේ කියලා. ඒ ටික දුන්නාම එයා motivate වෙනවා කියන්නේ. So this is something like that. So when we talk about the need theory, so there are two types of need theories that we're going to talk about. The first one is the Maslow's hierarchy, and the second one is the ERG theory. So let's first talk about the this one, which is known as Maslow's hierarchy. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් Maslowගේ hierarchy එක අපි ලියනකොට ලියනවා මේ මොනවාද මේකක් විදිහට triangle එකක් විදිහට ලියන්න පුළුවන්, මේ විදිහට ලියන්න පුළුවන්. So normally you have a kind of a triangle where you have 5 blocks in it, right? Blocks පහක් දාලා hierarchy එක අඳිනවා need theory එකේ. So when we're talking about the Maslow's hierarchy, probably this might be the most famous content theory that was developed by Abraham Maslow. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow කියනවා ළමයි මිනිස්සුන්ට තියෙනවා අවශ්‍යතාවයන් 5කට කැටගරි කරන්න පුළුවන්. Maslow identified 5 general types of motivating needs in order of attendance, I would say. So that it's more in a kind of a hierarchy. So you're starting from the physiological needs, maybe physiological needs, then you go to the safety needs, then you go to the belongingness, esteem, as well as the self-actualization station. Right? So මෙතින් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් වෙන්නේ මෙන්න මේ වගේ එකක්. අපි මැස්ලෝගේ හයරාකි එක ගහන්නේ මෙන්න මේ විදිහට ට්‍රයැන්ගල් එකක් විදිහට අපි කියනවා මෙන්න මේ ටික තමයි තියෙන්නේ. හරි. Physiological safety, belongingness, esteem, and self-actualization. So this is how it goes. So when we're talking about the Maslow's hierarchy, so you are starting with the physiological needs and you are moving up to the self-actualization. So the physiological needs, in a sense, those are the most basic human physical needs, right? So that includes food, water, oxygen, shelter, that you need something to eat for survival, right? So you need something to drink, you need something to wear, you need a place to stay, right? So these are the basic needs, right? So we call them as the physiological need. So when it comes to the organizational setting, so they are reflected in the needs for whatever the required basic salary for the survival. මට ඕනේ basic salary එකක් අඩු ගන්න මගේ කැම ටික ගන්න මට බොන්න ඉන්න අඳින්න කන්න බොන්න අඳින්න. So those are known as the physiological needs. මිනිස්සු ඉස්සෙල්ලාම රස්සාවකට යන්නේ මෙන්න මේ කියන කුංචි දේවල් ටික කරගන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා බලන්න. Physiological needs. So then when you are moving up on hierarchy, so then you are going to think about the safety too, right? So on the job එකට ගියා පොඩි salary එකක් හම්බ වෙනවා කිව්වා ඒක ඇති මට කන්න බොන්නයි මගේ ඇඳුම් වලට ඊළඟට මම ටික කාලයක් ඉන්නකොට මම බලනවා මගේ safety එක මෙතන, right? So that includes the safe and the security. So when we're talking about the security, so we talk about the physical as well as the emotional environment. So we are thinking about the freedom, so the freedom of from threats, right? So you just think about discrimination. So you are thinking about the the office violences, right? So gender violences. So you just think about the freedom from violence and whether this is a kind of an orderly society, right? So when we're talking about your organizational setting, so that should be a place with the safety needs, right? So you can ජීවත් වෙලා ඉන්න එපා තමන් ඉතුරු ටික කාලෙ ඉන්න. So you're thinking about the safety of your job, right? So with sometimes you just think about the radiations. If you are working in a lab, that you just think about the things that you deal with. So all these stuff are there, right? Safety needs. And then thereafter, you have the belongingness. Then on a so you feel like, okay, this environmental setup is nice and I have the freedom. So I have the safety, all these stuff. So you feel like now the belongingness. So you need to be the part of your organization, right? Then how to consider inclusiveness, inclusivity. So that's something important. So you need the reflected, so that means your desire to be the accepted by your peers, your friendship. So you matters all this stuff, right? So you in your organization, so all these needs influence for your desire for good relationship with your co-workers. සමහර වෙලාවට අර ඔයගලන්ගේ annual party දාන්නේ annual trip යන්නේ. So this is to improve this thing, right? Belongingness. And then thereafter, you have the esteem needs. So the esteem needs, in a sense, that is related to your desire for positive self-image. ඒ කියන්නේ වා හිතනවා right දැන් මම ටික කාලයක් මේක හිටියා. දැන් මේකේ වැඩක් කරනකොට මගෙන් කවුරු හරි අහයි. So you have this esteem needs, self-image. So you feel that people get the attention. That people like to get the attention, right? So they would like to get their self recognized. They like to get their self appreciated. So these are known as esteem needs. So when it comes to an organization, so esteem needs that reflects the motivation for recognition, right? So you have to understand it and you have to provide that to your employees. So the self-actualization is the last one on top, that you have this need because you are trying to fulfill yourself, self-fulfillment. Sometimes you're looking for higher qualification like trainings, potentials where you can make yourself more competitive. So that's known as a self-actualization. So according to the Maslow lamai, so this particular theory, so on bottom, මේ තියෙන පල්ලෙහා තියෙන ඒවට මේ පල්ලෙහා තියෙන needs වලට අපි කියනවා low order ඒවා. උඩට යන්න යන්න තමයි higher order needs එන්නේ. මේවා low order needs and higher order needs on top, right? So when we talk the low order needs, right? So the needs that you have below, so that's the physiological safety and the belongingness. So these needs, those takes the priority, right? So first you have to satisfy those low order needs in order to activate the higher order needs. right? So the needs are satisfied in a kind of a sequence, right? So first you have to go to the physiological needs, and then you have to go to the safety needs before the social needs, and so on, right? So you go in a kind of an order, right? So a person that is looking for the physical safety, that they will devote his or her efforts to secure a safe environment. මට ඕනේ violence නැති තැනක් ඉන්න. මගේ boss හරි නැතුව මට ඔයා training දුන්නට වැඩක් නැහැ. මට කියනවා පිට රටකට ගිහිල්ලා training එකක් අරන් ඉන්න දෙනවා. ඊළඟ මගේ boss එක harassment වැඩි. ඉස්සෙල්ලාම වෙන්න ඕනේ පළවෙනි එක harassment නැති freedom එක තියෙන තැනක් වෙන්න ඕනේ. ඊට පස්සේ තමයි self actualization ඒවා දෙන්න ඕනේ. So this is what it says, that you are going in a kind of an order, right? So you have to think about this. So that's about the Maslow's hierarchy. And now we are going to talk about the ERG theory. So ERG theory is also something little similar to the Maslow's hierarchy. So this provides a kind of a modification for the Maslow's theory because that they try to simplify. So if you just think about the Maslow's hierarchy, we had 5 steps, right? So we have talked about the 5 types of needs. But in here, that it has been simplified into 3 types, like existence, relatedness, growth. Existence E, relatedness R, growth G. So this is why we call as the ERG theory, right? So here we talk about the existence as relatedness and growth needs, which is much similar to the Maslow's hierarchy. So the existence needs, in a sense, we talk about the low order needs like physiological, safety, and the relatedness in a sense the belongingness. And when it comes to the growth needs, so we talk about the higher order needs in the Maslow's hierarchy. So that means the esteem and the self-actualization. So here anyway you have 3 layers. So the existence, in a sense, the needs for the physical well-being. So existence needs, in a sense, here you can see that the food, water, and the shelter. So the belongingness means the relatedness ones, the interpersonal relations and the feeling. Growth, in a sense, the higher order stuff. So that is self-development and the creative work. So what are the things that you can provide to motivate the people in each layer? For the people at the existence layer, so then you can give a basic payment, basic salary in order to buy food, whatever, the shelter and all the stuff that they want, the basic needs. And the belongingness, so that means the interpersonal relation feeling. So what you can do, you can create good relationship through these annual trips, annual parties, feedback can be given, performance evaluations, all are there. And the growth, in a sense, that the self-development and creative work. So what can you do? So you can improve their skills through the training programs as well as some of the activities. So those are the stuff so that you can use in order to improve these levels. So that's about the ERG theory. So when it comes to the ERG theory, it's a kind of a simplified version of Maslow's hierarchy. So if you just think about the ERG model and the Maslow's needs hierarchy are similar because both are in hierarchical form, and it's presumed that individuals move up the hierarchy one step at a time. But however, when it comes to the ERG, it's reduced the number of need categories to 3 and proposed that when you're moving up, the hierarchy is more complex, reflecting that frustration principle, right? So that is there. So that's about the ERG theory. And now we are going to talk about the motivation and hygiene theory. So if you just think about this, so we call it as අපි මේක කියනවා සමහර වෙලාවට two factor theory එක කියලා. So this was given by a person who is known as Herzberg, Friedrich Herzberg. Friedrich Herzberg has developed a kind of theory which is known as two-factor theory, where he has identified 2 type of factors that can be used to motivate people, right? එයා මොකද කළේ? එයා interview කළා මිනිස්සු 100ක්. So he has interviewed hundred of workers about times when they were highly motivated to work. හරිද? ඒගොල්ලෝ high motivate වෙලා වැඩියෙන් වැඩ කරන වෙලාවක එක වෙලාවක interview කරා. ඒ ටිකම එයා motivate කරා interview කරා motivate නැතුව dissatisfied වෙලාවක. That's the same setup. It's a kind of a panel data, right? So that they have used panel data in order to test it, right? His findings suggest that the work characteristics, so that is associated with dissatisfaction is little bit different from those factors that gives you the satisfaction. ඒ කියන්නේ උදාහරණයක් කිව්වොත් එයා simply කියන්නේ මිනිස්සු satisfied එක factors ටිකකින් dissatisfied නවත් factors වලින්. ඒක තමයි එයා එතනදී කියන්නේ. So we call these factors as motivated needs as well as the hygiene need. Right? So Herzberg believed that two entirely separate factors contribute to the employee's behaviors at work. First, first type of characteristic, he called them as the hygiene factors. So if you don't have the hygiene factors, so what happens? People might get dissatisfied. හරිද? එයා ඒකෙදි කියන්නේ මෙන්න මේක. එයා කියනවා, right? So that's it's a kind of a hierarchy. මෙන්න මේ විදිහ එකක් හිතන්නකො මෙන්න මෙහෙම තැනක ඉන්නේ. හරිද? මේ පැත්ත තියෙනවා hygiene factors. මෙතන තියෙන්නේ hygiene factors. මෙතන තියෙන්නේ motivate factors. මේ තියෙන level එකට අපි කියනවා this is the level that you are neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. Dissatisfied උත් නැහැ, satisfied උත් නැහැ. Neutral level එක. මේකෙන් පල්ලෙහා තියෙන්නේ dissatisfied level එක. මේකෙන් උඩ තියෙන්නේ satisfied level එක. Right? So when you don't have these factors, hygiene factors, then you are becoming dissatisfied. Right? So when you are fulfilling your hygiene factors, you are reducing your dissatisfaction and you come to this level. So then you are not dissatisfied and also you are not satisfied either. Neutral level එකට එනවා hygiene factors ටික ආවට පස්සේ. So what is hygiene factors? Those are the low order needs that we have discussed in Maslow's hierarchy and the ERG theory. So if you can remember the working conditions, pay and security, so the company policies, whoever the supervisors that you deal with, your interpersonal relationship, all these factors are known as hygiene factors. So those are in the area of dissatisfaction, right? So hygiene factors influence the level of dissatisfaction. So you are moving from highly dissatisfied to neither satisfied or no dissatisfied area මෙතනට ආවා. දැන් මෙතනින් එහාට යන්න තමයි ඔයා satisfy කරන්නේ. So you have the factors in order to make the employee satisfied. We call them as the motivators. So what are the motivators that influence the level of satisfaction? So the area of satisfaction. So the motivators are the achievement, recognition, responsibility, work itself, right? So all these stuff are there, right? So when we talking about these motivator factors, right? So these are the factors that impact towards the dissatisfaction, right? So hygiene factors are there as well as the motivators are there. So the motivators කියලා කියන්නේ ඔයාව motivate කරන්න පුළුවන් ඒවා. So that related to the nature of the work and how challenge it is. So I think you understood. There are two type of factors, as I said you before. So those are the motivators as well as the hygiene factors that impact towards motivation. So the second set of factors that influence the job satisfaction, so we call them the motivators. So the motivators focus on high level needs and includes achievements, right? Recognition, responsibility, and opportunity to grow. Right? So when it comes to the Herzberg, he believed that when the motivators are absent, motivators නැත්නම් මිනිස්සු dissatisfied නැහැ, හැබැයි satisfied උත් නැහැ. Right? So the workers are neutral towards work. But when the motivators are present, so the workers are becoming highly satisfied and motivated. So that's about the hygiene theory. And now we are going to talk about the equity theory. So the equity in a sense that equity so the equity in a sense that you treated fairly. So when it comes to an organization, you feel like that you are treated fairly. So treated fairly in the sense what? Treated fairly කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? So that means when you perform, so you feel right. So your effort is there. You get something that is respect to your effort. ඒ කියන්නේ අපේ outcome එකයි input එකේ ratio එක අපි බලනවා. Outcome input ratio එක අපි බලනවා. Right? මගේ input වලට කොච්චර output එකක් හම්බුණාද කියන එකයි මම බලන්නේ. හරිද? So this is what we call as the outcome input ratio that is always again මගේ input වලට මගේ outcome එක කොච්චර මොනවද මම දෙන input මම වැඩ කරපු පැය ගන්න මගේ skills මට degree එකක් තියනවද නැද්ද so these are inputs my experience all are inputs so what is the salary that I got what is the bonus that I got so all these stuff are outcome right so I check my outcome with the outcome input ratio so I get the outcome input ratio and I compare it all with the other colleagues මම බලනවා හරි මට ඩිග්‍රී එකක් නෑ එයාට ඩිග්‍රී එකක් තියෙනවා මට ඩිග්‍රී එකක් තියෙනවා එයාට ඩිග්‍රී එකක් නෑ එයාට මගේ සැලරි එක වෙනවා මට කියනවා මේක reasonable නෑ කියලා so you just think about the equity so equity exists when the person perceives their input ratio is equal outcome එක equal කියන එක නෙවෙයි මට යාට එකම salary එක හම්බ වෙනවා කියන එක නෙවෙයි මගේ outcome input ratio එකයි ඔයාගේ outcome input ratio එකයි සමාන වෙන්න ඕනේ right so this is what it says right so we call it as the equity so when we talking about the equity lamai sometimes that inequity කියලා කියන්නේ so inequity එක කියලා කියන්නේ so that exists when the workers outcome input ratio is not equal සමාන නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට underpayment inequity. Underpayment කියලා කියන්නේ I give more inputs to get the same output. මට ඩිග්‍රී එකක් තියෙනවා මම වැඩියෙන් වැඩ කරනවා හැබැයි මට හම්බෙන්නේ මෙයාගේ salary එකමයි. So ඒක underpayment. එකම salary එක හම්බුණා කියලා එතන equity එකක් නෑ. Because I work more so I should get more. Right? So that's known as an underpayment equity. So that means so ratio is less than the reference. So you worker feels they are not getting the outcomes they should given inputs. Overpayment කියලා කියන්නේ මට හොඳයි. මම කැමති හැබැයි ඒක හරියන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද අනිත් පැත්තෙන් මගේ referent dissatisfied වෙනවා. මොකද මම වැඩ කරන්නේ අඩුවෙන් ඒ උනාට මට වැඩිපුර හම්බ වෙනවා. අරයාගේ ගානම. එයාගේ ගානම මට හම්බ වෙනවා. So ratio is higher than the reference. So the worker feels they are getting more outcome than they should given input. So this is known as the overpayment inequity. Right? So as a manager, you always should try to restore the equity because when it comes to the inequity, so that creates tension in your organization because when you put more inputs that you should get more outcome. If not, what happens that the people might not work hard. So that's there. So that's why the equity is important. So you can use this equity in order to motivate people. So the next thing is the goal setting theory. So the goal setting in a theory in a sense that you can use goals in order to motivate people. So once you are given with the task, now the employees know that they have to achieve these goals in order to get the outcome, right? So the goals, goals willing up motivate karana. So that's known as the goal setting theory. And the next thing is the learning theory. So the learning in a sense that you learn from whatever the experiences that you have had past, right? So the permanent change in the person's knowledge or the behavior that is through a particular practice or an experience. You know that when you do something good, that you get something good. When you do something bad, that you get something bad. අපි දන්නවා right? කවුරු හරි මිනිස්සෙක් මොකක් හරි කළා ෆයර් කරා නම් අපි දන්නවා හරි මේ වගේ දෙයක් වුත් මටත් ඕකම තමයි වෙන්නේ. කවුරු හරි එක්කෙනෙක්ට මොකක් හරි දෙයක් ප්‍රොමෝෂන් එකක් හම්බුනම මම දන්නවා right මේ වගේ දෙයක් කරොත් මටත් හොඳ එකක් ප්‍රොමෝෂන් එකක් හම්බ වෙනවා. So this is there. So you are learning from theories. So the positive reinforcement as well as negative reinforcement. Positive in a sense මම අර කිව්වා වගේ ප්‍රොමෝෂන් එකක්, negative in a sense a kind of a fire. Whatever the examples that I have said you, right? So when it comes to positive reinforcers like pay raises, promotions, and when it comes to the negative reinforcers like, you have to be very careful when it comes to the negative reinforcers, right? So when you're fired, when you are demote, right? So these are there. So when it comes to the operant conditioning too, so that you have the extinctions, the punishments, right? So whatever the manager that they does not reward the behavior and over time, so the worker will stop performing it, right? So that is known as the extinction. Again, digging employee to තේරුනොත් මම කොච්චර හොඳට වැඩ කරත් ඒකට performance හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ, ඒකට outcome එකක් හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ කියලා then they will stop performing it. So this is what we call as the extinction. Punishment උත් අනිත් පැත්තේ එහෙමයි. ඒකත් මම කොච්චර අවුල් වලට වැඩ කරත් මට කිසි punishment එකක් හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ කිව්වොත් they start to continue it, right? So these are the conditioning tools. And the next thing is that organizational behavior modification, right? So that means managers that they use this tools sticker, positive reinforcement as well as the negative reinforcement or tools used karnawa to manage the people. So that's known as the organizational behavior modification through these tools. And also there is something called as social learning theory, right? So when we're talking about the people, Lama, so that they always learn through the people. They learn when person is motivated to learn by watching someone else. And when you are looking at someone, when someone is getting rewarded, අපි කියන්නේ අපි හැමෝම society එකක ඉන්න එක කැලලක්. ඒකට අපි society එක දිහා බලන් ඉන්නේ. අපේ community එක බලන් ඉන්නේ. අපි social animals ලා කියලානේ අපි කියන්නේ. So you are looking at them, the others. So you look and learn from the others. So when they do something, මේකම තමයි මේ කතා කරන්නේ self reinforces ගැන, right? Positive and the negative reinforces ගැන. So that's known as social learning theory. And when it comes to the managers, they always should align the inputs with the outcome. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි කිව්වේ inputs කියලා කියන්නේ employees ලා දෙන inputs අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම align කරන්න ඕනේ employees ලාට ලැබෙන outcome එකත් එක්ක. So if you just think about the expectancy theory, we said that the instrumentality, right? So we said that your outcome should motivated through the ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාගේ outcome input එක අතර අපි හැමතිස්සෙම relationship එකක් හදන්න ඕනේ. So this is what we call as the expectancy theory. So pay is and the instrumentality. So that must be high for motivation to be high, right? So that is there. So the need theory එකේදී අපි හැමතිස්සෙම use කරේ, you have given the payment in order to satisfy those needs that has been given by the Maslow's as well as the ERG theory. And the equity theory, we said that it has to be equal, equity has to be there. So it has to be reasonable. So we were talking about the outcome to input ratio. So we were talking about you should get the outcome which is always reasonable to the input that you have put. And the goal setting theory, so the payments always linked with the goals. Once you achieve the goals, you get the payments, so whatever the salary increment. And the learning theory, in a sense, also the outcome is distributed upon the performances of functional behaviors. So you have to always link your payment with the your outcome with your input. So this is what it's saying. So when we're talking about the payments, so we talk about something called merit pay. So that means when you are having the organization, you work together, sometimes you have teams. So in that case, you have to identify the individual tasks, right? නැත්තම් මොකද වෙන්නේ වැඩ කරේ නැතත් organization එකේ කීප දෙනෙක් වැඩ කරලා හොඳට perform කරොත් කරපු නැති කට්ටියටත් ඒකෙන් result එකක් යනවා. So just like your group assignments, right? So you have to have like individual plan, group plan, as well as organizational plan. Sometimes when you achieve the organizational plan, you get the benefits. You get the group plans. When you achieve the group plans, your group get benefited. But still, when you are having the individual plans, so if you do not achieve your individual plans, then we can see that, okay, you haven't worked hard. Right? So bonus has a kind of a higher impact on motivation, since if you just think about the salary it is normally not related to the performances. Therefore, the bonus that it has a huge impact towards the organization's performance, right? So with that, we have come to the end of motivation, and let's go to our next lesson. So that is what is it? So let's go to the leadership. So let's go to our next lesson. So that is leadership. So as I said to you before, when it comes to the leading, how you're going to influence people to achieve the organizational goals, because we know as a manager, so this is the one particular type of a function that you have to execute, so that you have to lead people in order to achieve the organization goal, because now you have a plan, you have the organizational structure, you have organized, you have allocated the resources, you have done everything, and now what you have to do is you have to influence the people. So you can influence through motivation as well as the leadership. So leadership in a sense as a manager, that you have a power in your hand, so you can use this power in order to achieve the organizational goal, in order to direct the people to achieve the organizational goal. So this is what we call as the leadership. So the leadership in a sense, that is your ability to influence people to achieve the organizational goals. Right. So when we're talking about the leadership, it's always deal with the power. So the effective and appropriate use of the power is the something crucial for the leadership. So you have to understand how the leaders get things done, and in order to understand how they get the things done, so you have to look at the source of their power. So how the leaders get their power. So when we're talking about the power, so that is the potential ability to influence the behavior of the others, right? Sometimes the power that can influence people in different manners. So when we're talking about the influence, so that is the අපිට influence කරන්න පුළුවන් ගොඩක් දේවල් වලට. So you can influence towards the attitudes, values, beliefs, and the behavior of the others. So when we're talking about this power, where this power comes from, what is the source of power? So this is what you have to understand. So when we're talking about the leadership, Lamai, so the personal leadership, so leadership might come up with different sources. So we talk about different style of leaders. Right. So when you're talking about the leaders, that they might different from one to another, right? So that they deal with different cultures, right? So if we just think about a manager, a Japanese manager might be totally different from an American manager, and also he might totally different from a European or UK manager. So that their culture makes them different. So the leaders becomes different. So if you just look at the leaders like Trump, as well as Rishi Sunak, and then if you just look at Nelson Mandela, if you look at Mother Teresa, if you just look at Mahinda Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Kumar. So then if you look at them, that you might understand, you might see the different characteristics of leadership. So if you just think about the Japanese person, so that it's totally different the way that they lead from the others, right? So the leadership always different across the cultures. So let's talk about the source of power. So where the power comes from. So the power might comes from the position as well as the person, right? Sometimes you get the power just because of the position. If you just think about your organization, so if you just think about my organization, so when you are the department head or the dean, so as a position you have the power, right? So it doesn't matter whoever the person that in that particular position, so you have the positional power. Position එකකින්ද මිනිස්සුන්ට respect කරන්නම වෙනවා. If you just think about the president, right? So the people who have talked about different things about that particular person, but now that they have to obey the rules because that there is a positional value. හැමෝම කතා කරන්නේ Mr. President කියලා තමයි. හරිද? ඒ president කියන එක තනක් තියෙන හින්දා position එකක් power එකක් තියෙන හින්දා. සමහර position එකක් නැති වුණා මොන position එකේ හිටියත් අපි යාට respect කරනවා. So that's personal power. So we talk about the position power as well as the personal power. So let's talk about the source of power that comes from the position as well as the power that comes from the personal. Right, so let's talk about the first power, that is the legitimate power. So the legitimate power, reward power, and the coercive power, all these power, coercive power, all these powers are coming from position powers, right? So when we're talking about the traditional managers, that always the power comes from the organization. So the manager's position gives him or her the power that to reward particular person or punish particular person, right? So therefore, you can influence their behavior through this positional power. So that's kind of the power that we talk about, the power that comes from the position. So if you just think of the legitimate power, so the legitimate power kila kiyane, so the power coming from the formal management position in an organization, right? So you are given with an authority. So that is called the legitimate power. So one person that once you have been selected as a supervisor, so just think you are a supervisor. So the most workers that they have understand that they are obligated to follow the supervisor's rules because if not, everything might go wrong. So you have to respect to the work activities. So the subordinate that they accept this source of power as legitimate. So because they have to, they realize that of course you have to obey his rules. So that's the rule. So that's known as the legitimate power. So you know that. It's written, right? So that's there. So the next thing is the reward power. So you know that he is the person who gives the rewards, right? So this particular person, he is the person who gives me the pay increases, promotions, bonus, attention, recognition. So the managers that they can use these rewards to influence their subordinates behaviors because they know that if they do not listen to their managers that they won't get these rewards. So that's known as the reward power. So the next thing is the coercive power. Coercive power, in a sense, the opposite of the reward power. So that means your authority to punish people, fire people, right? Right to fire or demote people, criticize them, right? So withdraw their pay increments, right? So that's known as the coercive power. So for an example, just think there is a particular person, salesperson, he does not perform as expected, so that his supervisor has the coercive power to criticize him. Right, so he has, you can put a kind of a negative letter in his file and you can hurt his chance for raises, right? So that's known as a coercive power. Okay, so that's about the positional power, position in the power. So the next one, the expert power and the referent power. So these powers are coming from the personal sources, right? So in contrast to the external sources of position power, so the personal power, so normally more often that comes from the internal sources. If you just think about a particular person, he might have a very special knowledge, a kind of a personal characteristic. So whenever you're going to do something, you ask from him. It's not just because of his position, because you know he knows the things, right? He knows the things. Expert power, skills, leader can. So you're asking from him. So the power resulting from the leader's special knowledge or the skills. So we call it as the expert power. So when the leader is a kind of a true expert, right? So the subordinate that they always go along with their recommendation because they know his or her superior knowledge, right? So if you just think about the leaders at supervisory level, normally that they have experience in the production process. So that gives them a chance to get the promotion. So this is what we call as the expert power. And on the other hand, you have the referent power. So the referent power in the sense, so the leader's personal characteristics that, so normally the followers that they respect some people, right? So they admire some people. So this is known as the referent power, right? So referent power is most visible in a charismatic leadership, right? So if you just think about the charisma, right? So if you just think about the social and religious movement, some of the people, Mother Teresa, right? So when we're talking about some of the people, right? So they have this charisma and they have this referent power, right? So that's about the referent power. So when we're talking about the power, the source of power, so as I said you before, the power might come from the position as well as the personal characteristic. So when we talk about the people, we are always talking about the empowerment. So we always say that the employee should be empowered, right? So gender empowerment කියලා සමහර වෙලාවට කතා කරනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ ඉස්සර අපි කතා කරේ හැමතිස්සෙම centralize කරලා power එක අපි ගාව තියාගන්න. But now we always try to delegate the authority and the responsibility to the employees. So we empower people. So we process of giving the workers at all levels of authority. So we make the decisions and we give the responsibilities for the outcome. So empowering people, right? So that's there. And also we heard talk about now we're going to talk about some of the leadership models. Leadership models can whatever the theories that you can use to describe the leadership. So the first one is the trait model. Trait model කියලා කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි ඉස්සර කාලේ කියනවා අපි ඉස්සෙල්ලම අඳුර ගන්නවා leaders ලා. හොඳ leaders ලා කියනලා කට්ටියක් අපි අඳුර ගන්නවා. We call that the leaders are born කියන concept එක තමයි අපි මෙතනදී පාවිච්චි කරේ. හරිද? අපි කියනවා leaders are born, so they are coming with some characteristics. So we identify some of the great leaders and then we select people who have these characteristics and we train them. So this is what we call as trait leadership. Leadership trait කියලා කියන්නේ ඒකට. So we call that if you just think about the early efforts to understand the leadership success, so that they focus on the leader's personal characteristics, so their traits. Traits කියලා කියන්නේ what personal characteristic of a particular leader. So that might be the intelligence, values, self-confidence, and their appearance. Right. So this is a kind of an early research focus. So what we have done, we have selected the people who have achieved the greatness. Great මිනිස්සු කියලා කියන great man approach එක කියලා අපි එකට කියනවා. So idea is very simple. So you find out what made these people great. And then you select the future leaders who already have this kind of traits. So that is known as trait model. එකට තමයි අපි කියන්නේ trait model කියලා. අනිත් එකේදී අපි කතා කරනවා trait එකට වඩා we are thinking about the behavior. So we call it as the behavioral approach. So people have realized that they are not in a position to define the effective leadership based solely on the traits. Right? So you cannot describe a particular person based solely on the traits. It's not just the traits, but you have to look at the behavior of the leaders too. Right? So how they might contribute to the leadership success or the failures. So this is what we call as the behavioral approach, right? So if you just think about the leaders, that they can adopt the correct behavior with the appropriate training. So if you are given with the good training, then they can go with the behavior, the standard behavior. So that's known as the behavioral approach. So when we talk behavioral approach, we talk about the consideration as well as the initiating structure, right? So if you just think about the consideration in a sense that there are a set of managers who think about the workers. The worker පැත්තෙන් හිතන කට්ටිය හිතනවා. So we call them as the considerate people, right? Considerate leaders. They have more charisma than the others. So the initiating structure in a sense that they are more focusing towards the structure and the task. They don't think about the people, right? අපි කිව්වේ මාකෆෙලර්ගේ කට්ටිය Henry Fayolගේ පැත්තයි. හරිද? ඒ කියන්නේ scientific management as well as the human perspectives, right? So initiating structure in a sense, you are more talking about the system, right? So then we are going to talk about the contingency model. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි කියනවා traits or behavior විතරක් නෙවෙයි. So you have to think about the situation, right? So here we talk about the contingency theory. So sometimes the situation makes the managers different, right? So that means the people, effective leadership is contingent in both the characteristics of the leaders as well as the situation, right? So in this case also we talk about the relationship oriented and the task oriented, that as we have discussed in our earlier slide, right? So when we talk situation characteristics, even a very good leader, even a one person that you thought really nice might be underperform in a bad situation, right? හොඳයි කියලා හිතන කෙනෙක් පවා situation එක සමහර වෙලාවට මේ COVID වගේ වෙලාවකදී economic crisis එකක වෙලාවෙදී අවුල් වෙන්න පුළුවන් perform කරන විදිය. So that is there. So you have to understand the situation has a kind of an huge impact towards the leadership. So if you just think about here, then when it comes to the situation, so it determines how much the workers like and trust their leaders. So there you have the task structures as well as the relationship, and also we have to think about the position power and the personal power too. Right? So when we're talking about this particular model, so you can use this style in order to manage the people. So as I said you before, so you have to understand. So it's a kind of a combination of the relations, task structure as well as the situations that you deal with. And also you have something called house path goal model. So that means this particular model suggests that when it comes to the effective leader, so that they try to motivate workers to achieve the organizational goals. First, you identify the outcomes. then you first identify whatever the inputs that they provide, and then you have to identify their whatever the outcomes that they are looking for. So you have to reward the workers for high performance, and then you have to clarify in the path. So that's known as the path goal model, right? So the path goal is a kind of a contingency model, so that it gives you the steps that as a manager, what are the steps that you should take to motivate the workers, right? So that is basically based on the expectancy theory that we have described in motivation, right? So what are the steps to path goal process? So that is here you have to determine whatever the outcomes, and then you have to reward the subordinates, and you have to clarify the paths which we have discussed so far. Right. So when you're motivating the path goal, right? So what happens? So the path goal identify four behaviors that the leaders can use. So those are the directive behaviors, supportive behaviors, participative behaviors, and achievement-oriented behaviors. Right? So the directive behavior, in a sense, that you always set your goals and you just tell whatever the task that you have to follow. Right? කියන direct කරන එක තමයි directive behavior කියන්නේ. So supportive behavior, in a sense, you always support. You look out the workers' best interest and you support them. So the participative, in a sense, you participate with them, and you give subordinates a kind of a say in the matters that affect them. So you always give them a space to act by their own. And then the achievement-oriented behavior. So you are setting very challenging goals in that case. So then you give them the motivate them through these goals, right? So then there is another one which is known as the leader substitute model. So we call that as the leader substitute. So that means this is the place where we feel that the leadership is unnecessary. So sometimes we try to substitute the leadership by some stuff. So that's known as the possible the identification of the possible substitutes for the leadership. So we call this as the leader substitute model, right? So sometimes you can identify the characteristics of some subordinates. So their skills and their experience and their motivation. Sometimes when you're having a very skill level of individual subordinates, then you feel like, okay, you don't need a leader at this level, right? And also the characteristics of the context. So when it comes to the task that is given, so when you're given with a kind of a task which is really important for the subordinates to achieve, so you feel like, okay, they can achieve by themselves, so you don't need a leadership, right? And also the work empowerment, right? So when you are empowered, we are trying to empower people. So when you have more skillful people, then you can rely on them, you can empower them, so then you don't need leaders at that there, right? So that's there. And now we are going to talk about the transformational leaders and the transactional leaders. So who are the transformational leaders? Transformational leaders, like most of the time that we call them as CEO so they have more relationship with the people, and they identify that charismatic leaders like here. So these kind of leaders, transformational leaders, so they are very similar to the charismatic leaders, so that they always have a special ability to deal with the employees. So they always think about the employees' needs and the concern. They help them to look at their problems in a kind of a new way. So they encourage always their employees to achieve high tasks and their own goals. And so these kind of people are known as transformational leadership. කියන්නේ තමන්ගේ task එක කරගන්න එක විතරක් නෙවෙයි, එයා හැමතිස්සෙම employee ගේ පැත්තෙනුත් හිතනවා. So that the human perspectives කියලා කතා කරේ අපි. අන්න ඒ පැත්තෙන් හිතන කෙනෙක් අපි කියනවා transformational leader කෙනෙක් කියලා. So they make subordinates aware that how important these people in their organization, workers ට කියන ඔයාලගේ කොච්චර important අපිට ඔයාලා කියන එක. So that they give them a space for the personal growth, right? Okay, then MBA so that's good for the organization. So this is what we call as the transformational leaders. So when we're talking about the transformational leaders, that they have the charisma, they are charismatic, they openly share the information with their subordinates, they engage with them, they improve their knowledge, they give them a chance to improve their knowledge and personal growth. So that's known as a transformational leaders. So the transactional leaders, in a sense, that they are more conventional leaders, right? So that they use their positional power, rewards, හැමතිස්සෙම rewards, punishment to use කරගෙන තමයි මිනිස්සුන්ව manipulate එහෙම නැත්නම් මිනිස්සුන්ව influence කරන්න හදන්නේ behavior එක. So those are the managers who use the reward and coercive power to encourage the high performance. So we call them as the transactional leaders. And then we have gender and leadership. So that means when it comes to the gender, when it comes to the women managers is rising. But still, if you just look at the parliaments as well as the business world, that you might have seen the lack of women representation when it comes to the CEOs and the board of directors, right? So, but still, we would say that it's rising. If you just think about 2-3 decades ago, that was drastically low. If you just think about, we can now see the it dramatically increased. It has been dramatically increased there. So there are some stereotypes suggest that women are supportive and concerned with interpersonal relations. Similarly, men are seen more task focused. I don't know whether it is true or not, but it's still that type of stereotypes are there. And I have seen totally different setup when it comes to the real world. Scenarios here. So that's about the leadership, and let's go to our next chapter. So that is groups and teams. Okay. So when we're talking about the groups and teams, you know that so in order to influence the people behavior, that you can use a special technique which is known as the group and teams, right? So you know that there is a concept 1 + 1 is not 2, that is more than 2. So that means when you are in a group or a team, so that your team output might be more than your individual summation of your individual output. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයාලා දෙන්නෙක් එකතු වෙලා වෙන වෙනම output එකක් දෙනවට වඩා දෙනකොට දෙන output එකට වඩා එකතු වෙලා එකට දෙන output එක වැඩි කියන එක තමයි මේ කියන්නේ. So when we're talking about the groups and teams, that groups are a little different from the teams. You know, the group in a sense to more people work together in order to achieve a particular goal. But team in a sense, so that is more cohesive. So they work hardly together. So they intensively work together. So when we're talking about the cricket team එක කියලානේ අපි කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ relationship එක වැඩි. ඒකයි cricket group එක කියන්නේ නැහැ අපි group assignment, team assignment එකක් කියන්නේ very rare, right? So that is why we say when it comes to a team, all the teams are groups, but all the groups can't be team. Team හැම එකක්ම group එකක් වුණාට group හැම එකටම team එකක් වෙන්න බෑ. So to be a team, that you have to work intensively with each other to achieve the specific common goals. So this is how the groups are different from the teams. But in here, we will be talking about the groups and teams together now, right? So why do you need the groups and teams? So what are the advantages or the benefits of having groups or teams? So you know, as I said you before, the synergy concept. So the 1 + 1 is not 2, it's more than 2. So the performance enhancement, right? So the members, that they correct each other and the productivity increased. And also when you're responding to the customers, so when you are having the cross-functional departments, so you can work together and you can respond to the customers rapidly. So what happened in the Ford case? What happens in Pizza Hut, right? So you're responsive to the customers. And also the innovation. So when you are having more people, so they come up with new ideas. So that gives you a chance for the innovation. And also when there is one person who work hard, so you get motivated by it. So you motivate from the members of the groups, and particularly teams that are better motivated and satisfy than the individuals. So that's so this is why it is important to have the groups and teams. So these are the advantages of having teams and groups. So when we're talking about the groups and teams, that there are certain types of formal groups and teams. So when it comes to the group and teams, there might be formal groups as well as informal groups. Formal in a sense, so that is given by the organizational structure. So you don't have any options. So these teams are there, you are included. Informal in a sense, you informally sometimes form groups. So we call them as the informal groups. So if you just think about the formal groups, so we call them as, there are many types of formal groups. So the first one is the cross-functional groups. So that means the members from the different departments. So for the marketing department, you have the people who do the marketing function. For the finance department, you have the financial department. So they are expertise in particular function. In some case, you get the function combination of these function and produce some teams, right? And also you might have cross-cultural departments. So the members of different cultures come from different groups. So we call that as a cross-cultural. So if you just think about the multinational companies, that they have different employees that represent different countries. So that particular team might represent the cross culture, right? And also you have the research and development team. So that is the team which develop the new products. And also you might have the top management team. So that is where you have the top managers in a one particular level. So they develop the firm's direction. So that's known as the top management team. Sometimes the board of directors, right? So you have the command group. So that means when it comes to a particular manager, that they might have a number of people who report to him. So these members report to the same manager, create a one group. So we call as the command group. And then there might be the task force. So sometimes when you need to complete a particular task, you create team. So when the task is done, then you dissolve the team. So that is known as a task force team, created to meet a given task. And also there might be self-managed teams. So the members are more empowered to complete some given task. So you might be having a self-managed team. And sometimes some sales team are self-managed teams. So these are known as formal groups and teams. So when we're talking about the self-managed work teams, so that they are given more responsibility, autonomy, so that they are like more autonomous subunits, that they have resources, that they have diversity, skills, and enthusiasm. So sometimes managers, that they do not need to supervise them, they just help them, support them, guiding and coaching. So that's there, right? So this is why we call them as a self-managed work team. So they can manage by themselves. They are more skillful. So we have talked about the formal groups, and now we are going to talk about the informal groups and teams. So when we're talking about the informal groups, that means you create for your enthusiasm. So sometimes friendship group and the interest groups, right? So these are known as the informal groups and teams, right? So when we're talking about the friendship groups, so they're made up by employees who enjoy each other companion, right? So if you just think about සමහර වෙලාවට අර එකම ටේබල් ටෙනිස් ගන්න කැමති කට්ටිය එකතු වෙලා ඒ වගේ එකක් හදනවා. So it's a kind of an interest group. So these are informal group within your organization. Right. So when we're talking about the groups, whether your groups work well or not, so that determines by few factors. We call them as the group dynamics. So the group dynamics affect how the groups or teams function. So the first thing is the group size. Size එක ගොඩාක් group members ලා වැඩි වුණොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Connection එක තියාගන්න අමාරුයි, communication අමාරුයි, relationship අමාරුයි. හැබැයි size එක ගොඩාක් අඩු වුණොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Diversity එක නෑ, skills නෑ ඕන කරන. So there is a trade-off always in the size, right? So you have to balance it. So you have to have an effect group, which is normally like 2 to 9 members. So when you're having a small group, so that interacts better, but you have to have enough number in order to fulfill the scheme, right? So the division of labor is possible with a very large group. And the next thing is the group task. So when it comes to the groups, that they are given with a task. So whether you work together or not, so that is depend on the type of the task. සමහර task තියෙනවා interrelated ගොඩක්. එතකොට ඔයගොල්ලෝ එකතු වෙලා අනිවාර්යෙන්ම වැඩ කරන්න ඕනේ. So when we're talking about the tasks, so these are the 3 types of tasks. So the first one is the pool task, and the second one is the sequential task, and the third one is the reciprocal task. Pool task එක කියලා කියන්නේ, so you all independently කියන්නේ අපි තනි තනියෙන් group එකතු වෙලා වැඩ කරලා put එකක් දෙනවා එකතු වෙලා. So that's known as the summation. So the members make separate independent contribution to the group and then get the final one. So here the relationship is very low. So you don't need to cohesively work together. So we call it as pool task එකක්. Sequence කියන්නේ so that means first one do the introduction, then give to the second one to do the methodology, and the third one add the results, and then you get the final product. So here the relationship is little more than this thing. But here, if you just think about these members work together, but these two not. These two work together. So this is how it goes, right? And the reciprocal, in a sense, you have the work members who closely with each other to produce the output. They work together. Cohesiveness is really high when it comes to this reciprocal task interdependence, right? So also you have the group roles. So that means whatever the set of behaviors that the group members are required to perform. So that's known as the group role. So when it is described well, then the cohesiveness is again high. And also then thereafter, we're going to talk about the group development. So how can you develop a team or group? So there are certain stages that you have to have in order to develop a group. So we call these are the 5 stages of group development. So the first one is the forming, right? So that means පටන් ගන්න. දැන් මොන group එකක් හදා පටන් ගන්නකොට පළවෙනි stage එක වෙන්නේ forming. So you don't know each other, you get to know each other, right? So you tell your names and whatever the details, your background, forming, right? So the members get to know each other and they try to tell their common goals and then they create groups, right? So that's known as the forming. Just think about the way that you have initiated your WhatsApp group and the way that you have appointed your batch rep, all these stuff. So that's forming. Storming in a sense, so right soon after you have started, then you realize, okay, this group is represented with number of people who are coming with different background. එතකොට දැන් ප්‍රශ්න වැඩි. තාම කට්ටිය හරියටම අඳුරගෙන නැහැනේ. මුලදී තමයි ප්‍රශ්න වැඩි වෙන්නේ. So we call it as the storming. So the members disagree on the direction and the leadership. So there might be lots of issues that happens. And the second is the norming. Then කාලයක් ගියාට පස්සේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ එකක් නම අඳුර ගන්නවා. So you close ties and you begin to develop relationships. So that is known as norming. So then thereafter you try to perform the task. Then තමයි අන්තිමට ඔන්න organization එක ඔයාලට තේරෙනවා right අපිට task එකක් දීලා තිනවා, we have to do this. So you group does it real work. So once the task is done, then you wrap up the thing. So that is known as the agile, right? So the task force are complete, it is temporary, so you can finish it off. So so that's about the stages of group performing. So when we were talking about the dynamics, meaning dynamics, so we said the size is important, as well as we said that the interrelationship, the connectiveness, the task interdependence is also important. We talk about the pool, we talk about the reciprocal and all these stuff. And then we talk about the group role. And now we're going to talk about the group norms. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි team එකක සාමාන්‍යයෙන් තියෙනවා group norms කියලා ඒවා ටිකක්. ඒ කියන්නේ rules මත් නෙවෙයි, but they are like more policies and whatever the ඒ කියන්නේ අපි කියනවා හරි වැඩට එනකොට 8ට පටන් ගත්තට අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් 8ට කාලක් ඉඳි ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නවා. So that is a kind of a norm. So normally we don't wear the dark colors. So that's a kind of a norm, right? So these are the group norms, right? So about the meeting hours, behaviors, and all this stuff. And the conformity and the deviance. So whether your group work well or not, so that depends on the conformity as well as the deviance. Conformity කියලා කියන්නේ ඕනවට වඩා හැමදේටම okay කිව්වොත් අලුත් idea එකක් එන්නේත් නැහැ. හැබැයි හැමදේටම deviance වුණොත් වැඩක් වෙන්නේත් නැහැ. කියන්නේ හැමදේම දාන්න රණ්ඩු එතකොට. හරිද? So therefore when it comes to a good group, so in order to get the best output, you should have the conformity as well as the deviance. So that is there is a trade-off. So you should balance the conformity and the deviance. Okay. So when we're talking about the group cohesiveness, so that means how well you work together. So you measure the loyalty of the group by its members. So when you have good cohesiveness, it increases the level of participation, level of conformity, and whether you're going to achieve the goals well. Right? So the cohesiveness කියලා කියන්නේ කොච්චර එකට වැඩ කරනවද කියන එක. අර stickiness එක කියලා කියන්නේ අන්න එක. Group size එකක් මම කිව්වේ ගොඩාක් අඩු වුණොත් එකට හොඳට වැඩ කරන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි skills අඩු වෙලා යනවා. අඩු කරන්න ඕනේ skill උත් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. So this is why it says, and you have to manage the diversity. So the group identity as well as the success. So when we're talking about the groups, right? So when you are managing the performance, so you always when you're having a group, so you motivate the groups to achieve the goals. So එතකොට group එකක් විදිහට පටන් ගත්තාම achieve කරන්න group එකටම තමයි outcome එක හම්බෙන්නේ. So you have to be very careful in order to measure the individual performances in the groups too. Right? So the කියන්නේ social loafing කියලා කියන්නේ මේකනේ. Social loafing කියලා කියන්නේ එක්කෙනෙක් වැඩ කරනවා අනිත් එක්කෙනා වැඩ නොකර ඉන්නකොට ගොඩාක් කට්ටිය එකට වැඩ කරනකොට එක්කෙනෙක් වැඩ කරන්නේ නැති එක අහුවෙන්නේ නැහැ. So that's known as a social loafing. So that is known as the human tendency to put less effort in a group than the individually. So you always try to eliminate it. Normally එහෙම වෙනවා. මිනිස් තනියෙන් කරනකොට තමන්වමනේ රිෆ්ලෙක්ට් වෙන්නේ. ඒතකොට හොඳට කරනවා. ගෲප් එකක් කිනකොට කියනවා ආරයි ගෲප් එකේ අනිත් එක්කෙනා කරලා සුප් එකේ කතාව. ආන්ටි හත් දෙනාට කැන්දෑලිය කියන්නේ so අනේ ඒ වගේ සීන් එකක්. Right? So that is known as the social loafing. So you have to be very careful. You have to make individual efforts identified in your process. So that's something really important to understand. And also you have to help groups to manage the conflicts, because when you are having the groups, so that means you might have the conflicts. So you have to manage them too. So that's about the groups and teams. So with that, we have come to the end of leading function. So when it comes to the leading, I said just because of the complexity of the function, we have divided the leading function into 3 chapters like motivation, leadership and teams. Apart from that, there is another one called communication, but we're not going to study it here, right? So I'm not going to do the communication. I'm going to skip it. So we're coming to the last session, last function, managerial function. So that is controlling. So let's talk about the control function now. Okay, let's talk about the control. So the control in a sense that how you're going to control your process. So that means when you try to achieve the organizational goal, you should check whether you will be able to achieve it or not. Right? So then you have to make the correction. So this is what we known as the control. Control කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියන එක ඔයාගේ plan එකේ ඔයා කලින්ම ලියලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. Right? So this is why we need the control. So the control in a sense that is monitoring and evaluating. So we have to evaluate whether you are efficient enough to convert your inputs into the output. So you know the basic function of the firm is that you are converting your input into the output. So you have to check whether you are doing it efficiently. So as a manager, so this is your duty, right? And also you have to check the quality, and also you have to check whether your employees are responsive to the customer satisfaction, right? So you have to check whether the managers are innovative in organization. So these are the things that you have to control, you have to monitor and evaluate. So when we're talking about the controlling system, so it's a kind of a structured system that you can use in order to evaluate the monitor, get the data, and you do the monitoring and evaluation. So that's something. In order to do that, you have to have data definitely. So you have to have what you call hot data. I mean, so that means the data that not outdated. Right. So, and also the system should be a kind of a flexible one where the managers can have access to the data. The data should be accurate, so that they should be timely. So you have to have this data in order to make the decisions, in order to compare the system. So that's why we need a kind of a good control system. So when we're talking about the controlling lemma, so there are three types of control. So the first one is the feed forward control. So that means you take the control precautions. So just before something goes wrong, that you make some action. So we call these as the precautions, feed forward. So that has to be done at the input stage. So just before you go to the production flow. So sometimes you know that the quality of the product depends on the quality of the input. So you give the standard. So when you get the fabrics, when you get the yarns, when you get the buttons, you say, okay, these are the parameters. So these are the standards for the inputs, right? So you give the benchmark for the inputs, right? So that is known as the feed forward. So just before the things happen, so the managers anticipate the problems before they arise, and they give kind of rigorous specifications to the suppliers. So that's there. We call it as the feed forward control. So the concurrent, in a sense, that is not at the input stage. So now you are converting input into the output throughout the process, but you have not completed it. The product convert කරලා නැහැ. process එක වෙලාවේදී you identify whatever the issues. දැන් අපි process එක හදනකොට අපි බලනවා right අපි මේකෙදී එක assembly line එකකට අපි කිව්වා products 1000ක් හදන්න කියලා. ඒත් මේ දෙවෙනි line එකේ හදන ගාන අඩුයි. ඒ හදන ගාන අඩු වෙන්නේ මේ machine එකේ අවුලක් තියෙන හින්දා. මේ machine එකේ දාලා තියෙන්නේ products CI මේ වෙද්දි. හරිනම් 200ක් දාන්න ඕනේ. So we identify that there is an issue in that particular machine. We have to replace or recorrect this. So that is known as the concurrent. So within the process, so you give the immediate feedback on how inputs are converted into outputs. So that allows the managers to correct the problems at the time that it happens, right? So if you just think about a particular manager, as I said, that they have identified a particular machine that is becoming out of alignment, you have to fix it. And so that's known as the concurrent. So the feedback, in a sense, that everything has been done, right? So now you get the feedback from the customer. You can't you can't do anything now. What you can do, so you can do the correction at the next production cycle, right? So you provide after the fact information. So the managers can use them in future. So the customer feedback to products are used to take the corrective actions in the next production cycle. Then and future. So that is known as the feedback type. So when it comes to the control, so that might be three types like feed forward, concurrent, and the feedback. So how can you control your organization? So there are 4 steps that you have to go through in order to implement your control process. So the first thing is, in the plan, you should have the standards. So you have to tell, so this is how I'm going to control it, right? So මගේ standards ටික මට මේ මාස තුල ඉවර වෙනකොට products 10000ක් හදලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. Defects තියෙන්න පුළුවන් දෙකයි ඊට වඩා බෑ. So this is what it says. You give the standards. So you have to answer the calls within 2 rings. So this is the standard. So you establish the standards. So the managers at each level needs to set their own standard. It doesn't matter whether you are at the top level, middle level, or frontline manager. You should have your own standards, right? So then the second step is that you have to measure your actual performance. So this is what I said. This is why I said when it comes to the controlling, so the information, so that plays a kind of a significant role. So you should have timely information. So you have to get an idea about whatever the performances at that time. මේ වෙලාවේදී කීයක් හදලා තියෙනවද? එක line එක කොච්චර හදනවද? එක machine එකකින් කොච්චර හදනවද? ඔය හැම detail එකක්ම තියෙන්න ඕනේ. So you have to measure the actual performance. Then you have to compare the actual performance with the standard. මං හදන්න කියන්නේ 10000ක් මාස තුල ඉවර වෙද්දී. එතකොට මාසයක් ඉවර වෙද්දී මෙච්චර හදලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. හදලා තියෙන්නේ මෙච්චරයි. So you compare the actual performance against the chosen standard. So that's there. And then you evaluate the results. So you have to take the corrective action. So whatever the things that I should do. So these are known as the evaluating results. So that is the control process where you go through these steps. Right. So when we're talking about the controlling lemma, so that there are many stuffs that you can use. So the first one is the output control system. We can අපිට financial controls use කරන්න පුළුවන්. So what are the types of controlling systems that you can use? Financial කියලා කියන්නේ අපි අර budget එක දීලා අපි financial accounting වලදී ඉගෙන ගන්න profit ratio එක බලන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ මම මෙච්චර invest කරා නම් මට කොච්චර return එකක් හම්බ වෙනවද? Liquidity ratio. So we take the current ratio as well as the current asset as well the quick ratio එක අපි ගන්නවා. Ratios බලනවා. Leverage ratios බලනවා. Turnaround ratios බලනවා. So these are the financial ratios that you can use in order to understand how well you perform in an organization. මම ඔපරේට් වෙනවද හොඳට? මගේ ඉන්වෙස්ට්මන්ට් වලට සාපේක්ෂව මට රිටර්න් එකක් හම්බ වෙනවද? කොච්චර ටර්න් ඕවර් එකක් වෙනවද? කොහොමද ස්ටොක් චේන්ජ් වෙන විදිය? ස්ටොක් ටර්න් ඕවර් එක, right? Current assets, current liabilities කොච්චර තියෙනවද? So these are the ratios that you can use to get an idea about the financial control. So you will be studying those stuff in financial accounting too. And the next thing is the output control system, that is through the organizational goals. So whether you have achieved the organizational goals. So then if you have not achieved that means you have to take the corrective actions. So that's also a part of control system. And also your budget, whether you are stick to the budget, whether you are within the budget, your operating budget. So you can use the budget as a tool to the controlling system. And also you can think about the output standards. So you need talking about your output that you can give them the standards. So whether you meet the benchmark, your short-term goal, research and development and all these stuff. And then you can think about the behavior control system. So that means you can control through the direct supervision. ඔයාට directly මිනිස්සුන්ව බලලා rewards දෙන්න පුළුවන්, ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා නම් fire කරන්න පුළුවන්. So the direct supervision can be used too. And also you can use the objectives in order to manage or the control people. So you can give them the task, and if they achieve the task, then you can control through these objectives. And so that is what we call as the management by objectives. And also when we're talking about the control, you can have the bureaucratic control. So where you have some standard operating procedures. So you say these are the red tape. So these are the rules, procedures that you have to follow. So you are given with the code of conduct skill. So these are given. So that's there. But then it comes to the bureaucratic control. So there may be some problems because people do not like to follow these kind of systems and the procedures, rules and all this stuff. Rules easier to make than delete. So it's a kind of a red tape, right? So it's not something always practical and flexible. And also you can use the culture, organizational culture in order to control. ඒ කියන්නේ සමහර වෙලාවට අපි කියුවා organization එකේ culture එකක් තියෙනවා, right? අපි එනවා 8ට කාලක් තියෙන්සි. අපි මෙතනදී කන්නේ නැහැ. කන්න නම් අතනට යනවාමයි. So we don't wear the sleeveless. We don't wear these kind of check shirts. We don't wear the dark ties. And also when we wear the belt, we wear the same color shoes, right? So those are the culture. Right, so you use this culture in order to control the teams and the groups and the organizations. So we call it as a clan control. So when you're controlling through the development of internal system, which is like value and norms, we call it as the clan control. And then when we're talking about values and norms, so as I said you before, these are not the rules. So these are like the values and norms. So the organization that they work hard to create a kind of a culture that encourage the people to achieve the organizational task and the rewards consequence, right? So that's about values and norms. So when we're talking about the organizational culture, so there are many values that you have. There might be the founder's value, there might be the socialization process. You don't need these stuff much, right? And you might have some ceremonies, some rituals that you have within your organization, some rights, okay, some stories and the languages. Okay, අපි කියන්නේ සමහරවිට කියනවා මේ අපි සමහර හොටෙල්ස් වල තියෙන්නේ අපේ මෙහෙම කෙනෙක් හිටියා මෙයා මෙහෙම ආවා දැන් අර පබ්ලික්ගේ සිද්ධිය කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ. It's a kind of a story that describes that what happens to the employees at the organization. So they say that you have a good future with us, right? So it's a kind of a story, and language, ceremonies are there, right? So when we're talking about the managers, as I said you before, so that they can use these all these planning, organizing, leading, controlling කියන තුනේදීම ඇත්තටම ඔයාට මේ culture කියන එක use කරන්න පුළුවන්, right? Not only the controlling, right? So with that, we have come to the end of controlling function 2. So with that, we have come to the end of this particular session actually, right? So if you have any question, you can ask, right? So today we have covered almost all the stuff. So you won't get anything else, right? So you will be getting whatever the things that we have.
Recording stopped.
So if you have any question, you can ask. If not, we can wind up the session. So I gave you the assignment topic, and also I told you about the quiz. And let me check the time. Quiz will be on Tuesday, right? 10th of March. It will open at 8 p.m. and close by 10. You have 45 minutes. As I can remember, there will be 30 or 40 questions. I can't remember exactly. I can say that it would be around 30 to 40 questions. Open on Tuesday, 11th March. And it will be open at 8 p.m., close at 10. And there will be 30 to 40 questions that you have to answer within 45 minutes. Okay. Exam paper structure. So it has not been changed yet, as I know, right? Yeah, quiz එක chapters ඔක්කොගෙම ඉන්නේ නැහැ. Quiz එක you will be getting from the first 4 chapters, right? So that is, otherwise it won't be the continuous assessment. This is just because of the emergency that has happened, because I was not well last week. So therefore I covered only 2 chapters. I couldn't cover the rest of the 2. So therefore I have postponed the quiz to the Tuesday. So what I'm doing is that you will be getting the quiz from 4 first chapters. Introduction, organization, environment, as well as planning and organizing. So these are the 4 chapters. And then when it comes to the exam paper structure, we have done some modification to all internal students, but I don't know whether it's applicable for you guys. As far as I know, that there was no changes happened so far. So you will be getting the same paper. So same paper, in a sense, same kind of paper. So like the MCQs, there will be 20 MCQs and 4 structured essays and 2 essays. This is how it goes, as I can remember, right? There might be a kind of a small change, but there won't be a big change. But for the internal students, that there was a change happened, but I don't think that so far we have not informed that anything regarding the external, right? For the internal people, that they have MCQs as well as the essay question. They don't have structured essays. But for you guys, I think that still it's there. So please go through the model questions as well as the model MCQs as well as the model questions. The home assignment is given, the topic is there, so don't write lot. So it's enough to write just 2-3 pages, 2 pages and 3 maximum, so that would be enough. So you have to complete and you have to submit it at the time that you come to the exam. So this is how it happens. So you have to submit it when you come to the examination. It should be a written one. It's not my something that I want, because it's the rule here. So they always ask you to write and submit, right? So write it and then submit. Don't write a lot. Just write 2-3 pages. That would be more than enough. So submit it and do the continuous assessment. Mark doesn't matter. Attempt, right? So that's the most important thing, continuous assessment, because if you don't attempt, then you won't get any marks. So if you attempt, you will be getting at least 5 marks, because we will be doing the standardization, right? So that's there. Yes. That's there in the organizing. If you can remember the organizing chapter, so that was on the last slide. Please check the organizing chapter. So that's on the last slide. It says home assignment. Okay. It's enough if you can write just 2-3 pages. That's enough. More than enough. 2-3 pages. Yeah. If answer about what, in a sense? Not the model question, for the home assignment. Oh my God. 1 second. 1 second. So I think that you can see now the slide, right? So this is the organizing presentation. So on last slide, you have your home assignment. So this is your question. So you have to answer for this particular question. So I said that 2 or 3 papers would be more than enough. So let me know if you have any other question. If not, we can wind up the session. Okay, I hope that you don't have any questions. So we have come to the end of the session. So I'll put the recordings, right? So I couldn't put the last time one, but I'll put all the recordings by tomorrow night. Okay. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Please show madam home assignment again.